Tonight, we're diving into the complete history of every Horcrux, the darkest magic Lord Voldemort ever created, and the terrible price of a soul torn 7 times. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm. A living being decides that the soul itself can be treated as something to be cut, divided, and hidden away. This is the story of the darkest magic of all, and it begins with a word that most witches and wizards refuse to speak aloud. A Horcrux. The name itself seems to lower the temperature of any room it enters. In the great libraries of the magical world, the books that once described it were pulled from the shelves long ago, locked behind wards, or quietly destroyed. Teachers would not explain it. Parents would not name it. For generations, the knowledge survived only in whispers, in the restricted corners of old collections, and in the memories of the very few who had gone looking for it and had come back changed. So let us begin where the whisper begins, with the simple meaning underneath the fear. A Horcrux is an object, any object at all, in which a person has concealed a fragment of their own soul. That is the whole of it, stated plainly. Yet inside that plain sentence lies the most terrible act in all of magic, because a soul does not divide on its own. It does not come apart because a wizard wishes it or wills it or studies it long enough. The soul, whole and settled, resists every gentle attempt to move it. To split it, something must tear it, and only one act in the world carries that particular violence. That act is murder. The taking of another life, the deliberate ending of someone who was breathing a moment before, is what wounds the soul of the one who does it. The old lore held that killing rips the killer apart on the inside, opening a seam where before there was none. Most who kill never notice this wound, or feel only a dull heaviness they cannot name, and in time the seam closes over as best it can. But a wizard who has studied the darkest magic knows how to use that seam. In the hour after the killing, while the soul is still torn and raw, that wizard can take the loosened fragment and seal it. Through a spell so guarded that its exact words were kept from nearly every page ever written inside a chosen vessel. We should pause here and let the weight of that settle, softly, the way heavy things settle in deep water. A person must first choose to end a life, and then, rather than grieve or turn away, must turn toward the damage and treat it as a doorway. There is a coldness in that sequence that is difficult to hold in the mind. It is not a crime of passion or a mistake made in fear. It is patient. It is deliberate. It is a decision made with the full weight of intention behind it, and that is part of why the whole magical world came to regard the very subject as something not to be discussed. And what does a wizard gain for paying such a price? The answer is the thing that has tempted the ambitious and the frightened across all the long is an anchor. As long as even one fragment of a person's soul rests hidden and protected somewhere in the world, that person cannot truly die. Their body may be struck down, burned, broken, or destroyed entirely, and still they do not pass on. The torn piece of soul, tethered to its object, holds the rest of them here, refusing to let go, keeping them suspended in a form of existence that is neither living nor dead. This is the immortality that the Horcrux promises. A wizard who makes one has, in a sense, hidden a spare life outside their own body. A candle burning in a locked room that no ordinary death can reach. Yet we call it a hollow immortality, and the word is chosen with care. What survives is not the person as they were. A soul kept together only by torn fragments and dark tethers is not a soul at peace. It cannot rest, it cannot grow, and it cannot love in the way the whole once could. The old accounts describe such existence as thin and gray and endlessly hungry, a shadow of a life stretched out across time with no warmth left inside it. To make a Horcrux is to trade the fullness of one life for the endless dimness of an unfinished one. The maker does not cheat death so much as refuse it, standing forever in the doorway, neither stepping through nor stepping back. There is a cost written into the very act, and it is a cost that deepens with each repetition. Every splitting leaves the remaining soul smaller, more damaged, less able to feel the things that make a person human. Mercy grows faint, fear of consequence fades. The face in the mirror slowly stops looking like the person it once belonged to. Those few who studied this magic and lived to record their thoughts spoke of it not as a triumph, but as a kind of slow unmaking. A wound that never heals because its maker keeps reopening it on purpose. The more times the soul is torn, the further from wholeness the wizard drifts, until what remains can barely be called a self at all. This is why the subject was buried so thoroughly, and why the dread around it runs so deep. It was not only the difficulty of the spell that kept it hidden, though the spell was fearsome and few could master it. It was the horror of what the spell required. To even seek the knowledge was to admit a willingness to kill, and to keep it was to hold something that the rest of the magical community would have destroyed on sight. So the lore went underground. It passed from one careful, secretive hand to another, guarded like a coal that must never be allowed to catch. Even the greatest scholars of dark magic tended to speak of Horcruxes obliquely, circling the idea without ever setting it fully down, as though naming it too clearly might invite it closer. And so, we come to the shape of the thing we will follow through the chapters ahead. A Horcrux is not a weapon in the ordinary sense. It does not strike or burn or curse. It simply endures, sitting quietly wherever it has been hidden, holding a splinter of a broken soul and refusing to let its maker die. It is the darkest magic of all, not because it is loud, but because it is so patient, so cold, and so willing to trade away everything tender in a person in exchange for the mere fact of not ending. There is something almost restful, from the safe distance of a story, in tracing how such a fearful idea came to be, in watching it from the outside as it moves through history without ever being able to reach us here. For as terrible as the idea is, it did not appear out of empty air. Someone, long ago, was the very first to look at the torn soul and see not a wound to be feared, but a door to be opened. Someone was the first to speak the unspeakable spell and walk away still standing. Up next, in Chapter 2, Herpo the Foul, we'll uncover how a single ancient wizard, working in the deep past of the magical world, became the first to bind his soul to an object, and how the shadow he cast reached across thousands of years to touch every dark tale that came after him. In the hush of the last chapter, we came to understand what a Horcrux truly is, and how heavy a thing it is to carry. We learned that it is not a weapon in the ordinary sense, not a wand or a curse or a poisoned blade, but something far quieter and far stranger. A Horcrux is a hiding place for a fragment of a soul. To make one, a wizard must tear a piece of the self away, split it loose from the whole, and seal that broken shard inside some outward object so that a part of the maker lingers on even after the body has failed. We spoke of how the soul was thought to be whole and seamless by nature, and how only a great violence could ever divide it. And we let that idea settle over us like a blanket drawn up in the dark, the notion that a person might scatter themselves across the world in little vessels, hoping never to be wholly gone. Now, as the night deepens and your breathing slows, we drift gently backward, away from the towers of Hogwarts and away from the more recent centuries, into a time so distant that most of it survives only as rumor. For every dark art has a beginning, a first hand that dared to shape it, and the story of the Horcrux is no different. Long before the four founders raised their castle in the Highlands, long before the Sorting Hat ever sang, there was a name spoken low among those who studied the forbidden branches of magic. That name was Herpo the Foul, and it is with him that our slow journey into the oldest shadows begins. Herpo lived in ancient Greece, in the sunlit and olive-scented world of the old Mediterranean, in an age when magic and myth were woven together so tightly that few could tell where one ended and the other began. He was a wizard of great learning and greater ambition, and the histories that mention him do so with a kind of shiver, for he is remembered not for healing or for wonder, but for the terrible firsts that trail behind his name. He is credited, in the whispered records of the wizarding world, as the very first sorcerer ever to fashion a Horcrux. Before Herpo, the idea may have floated in the minds of the curious, a dark possibility turned over in secret and set aside. After Herpo, it existed. He was the one who crossed the threshold, who took the theory of a divided soul and made it real, and in doing so, he opened a door that could never again be fully closed. We do not know, and perhaps we are not meant to know, exactly how he came to it. The knowledge of how a Horcrux is made was guarded so jealously across the ages that even the wisest teachers refused to speak of it aloud, and much of what Herpo discovered has been lost to the long erosion of time. Yet the tradition holds firm on this single point. He was the innovator, the grim pioneer, the man who first learned that a soul could be torn and a fragment of it caged. Everything that came after, every dark wizard who reached for immortality by this dreadful means, walked in the faint footprints Herpo left behind in that ancient world. It is worth pausing here, in the quiet, to think of how old this makes the forbidden magic we are following. When we imagine the dark arts, we often picture something modern, something that belongs to the recent past. But the roots of the Horcrux reach down past the founders, past the medieval castles and the robed councils, all the way into antiquity, into a Greece of temples and columns and long shadows cast by the setting sun. The legend of Herpo tells us that the wish to cheat death is not new at all. It is one of the oldest hungers there is, and it was already ancient when Herpo gave it a shape. And the making of that first Horcrux was not the only dreadful thing Herpo brought into the world. The same histories that name him the first maker of a soul vessel name him also as the first breeder of a basilisk, that monstrous serpent whose gaze alone can kill. It is a strange and fitting pairing when we sit with it in the dark. Herpo took two paths that no one had walked before, and both of them led away from the light. With one hand he split his own soul and hid it away against the coming of death, and with the other he coaxed into being a creature of pure lethal power, a great snake hatched from a chicken's egg, brooded beneath a toad, its eyes so deadly that to meet them directly was to fall. The basilisk would slither on through the centuries of wizarding fear, and one of its distant kin, ages later, would come to coil in the depths beneath Hogwarts itself, in the hidden chamber of secrets. But that thread belongs to another night. For now it is enough to know that the same ancient hand that shaped the first Horcrux also shaped the first of those serpents, and that Herpo the Foul stands at the dark headwaters of both. Try to picture him, softly, the way one pictures a figure in a fading dream. A scholar bent over his work in the warm Greek dusk, surrounded by scrolls and vessels and the low hum of forbidden study. A man who looked at the plain and universal fact of death, the thing that comes for every living creature, and refused to accept it as his own fate. There is something almost sorrowful in it when the tension is drawn away and only the shape of the story remains. Here was a person so unwilling to end that he was ready to break the wholeness of his own spirit, to live on as something less than whole, scattered and hidden, rather than pass on as all things pass. The name the histories gave him, the Foul, tells us plainly enough how his choices were judged. Yet the man himself has softened into legend, a silhouette against the ancient horizon, more symbol now than flesh. For that is the last thing to hold as we settle deeper into sleep. Herpo the Foul is not a figure of dates and documents so much as a figure of memory, a story passed down in whispers from one generation of dark scholars to the next. His deeds were spoken of quietly, carried forward not in bright celebration, but in low and careful voices, the way one hands along a warning. Across the long centuries the tale traveled, thinning and darkening as it went, until Herpo became less a man and more a shadow at the root of things, the ancient origin of a forbidden craft. When later wizards spoke of Horcruxes at all, they spoke, whether they knew it or not, of the door that Herpo had opened in that distant Greek twilight. The whisper of his name lay beneath their fear, like the first stone beneath a great and terrible tower. And so the origins of this dark magic rest in the deep past, calm now with distance, an old story turned slow and quiet by the passing of the ages. We have found the first maker. We have stood at the faint beginning of the long road that the Horcrux would travel. But a beginning always asks a question, and the question here is a simple and a haunting one. If such a thing had lain in the world since ancient times, waiting in the oldest whispers, then who, in a far later age, would first dare to learn of it again? Who would be curious enough and bold enough to ask about a magic the wise had spent 1,000 years refusing to name? Up next in Chapter 3, The Boy Who Asked, we'll uncover how a single quiet question, put by a gifted and hungry young student to a teacher who should have known better, stirred these ancient shadows back into waking life. Long ago, on that far shore of the ancient world where Herpo the Foul had first bent the laws of the soul to his will, the knowledge he made did not die with him. It slipped from one careful hand to another, hushed and hidden, passing down through the centuries like a coin worn smooth by too many fingers. Herpo left the world, but the idea he had planted stayed rooted in the deep soil of forbidden lore, waiting in the dark for the mind patient enough and cold enough to lift it into the light again. We drift now across a great span of years, past the founding of the 4 houses, past the raising of the castle in the highlands, and we come to rest in a colder country and a colder heart, where that old seed found new ground to grow. Here, in the story we might call The Boy Who Asked, we meet a child who was, by every outward measure, everything a teacher could wish for. His name was Tom Riddle, and he had come to Hogwarts as an orphan, raised in a plain gray building in a plain gray city, knowing nothing of the world of wands until a letter found him. When he arrived beneath the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, and the old hat was lowered onto his dark head, it sang out the name of Slytherin, the house of the cunning and the proud. And in that moment, a quiet path opened before him that he would follow to its very end. We watch this boy move through the corridors of the school, and we notice how easily the world seemed to bend toward him. He was clever in a way that felt almost effortless, gathering knowledge the way other children gathered marbles, and his teachers marveled at how quickly he mastered whatever was set before him. He was handsome and well-spoken, softly charming when it served him, and he learned early how to arrange his face into whatever shape would win him what he wanted. To most of the castle he seemed a model student, polished and calm, the sort of boy who would surely grow into something fine. Yet beneath that smooth surface there ran a current that was neither warm nor kind. Where other children felt the pull of friendship, he felt only the pull of usefulness, weighing each person he met by what they might one day give him. He kept a small circle of admirers close, boys who followed where he led, and he learned to move them like pieces across a board, never letting them see how little he truly cared. He collected secrets the way he collected trophies, quietly, patiently, and he tucked them away for the day he might need them. There was in him a stillness that was not peace, but hunger, a watchful quiet that took in everything and gave back only what he chose. Above all else, one thing gripped him more tightly than any other, and that was the ordinary fact of death. To most of us, the knowledge that all living things must one day end is a truth we learn to carry lightly, folding it away and living our lives beneath it. To Tom Riddle, it was an insult he could not forgive. He had seen how his mother had slipped from the world, giving him life and then leaving it. And somewhere in the cold rooms of his childhood, he had decided that whatever else happened to him, he would never allow that same soft closing to fall upon himself. He did not fear death the way a frightened man fears it. He hated it, the way a proud man hates a rule he believes should never apply to him. So we follow him into the library, into the long evenings among the tall shelves, where he read far beyond the lessons his teachers set. He searched the old volumes for any hint of what he wanted, and he found scraps here and there, faint mentions in the margins of dusty pages, half-sentences that spoke of magic, dark enough to hold a soul against its natural passing. In one book, he found a name for the thing he was seeking, a single strange word that seemed to hum with promise, and yet the books would not tell him more. They gave him the word and then fell silent, as if the deepest part of the knowledge had been cut away and buried where no student was meant to reach. He had the shape of the secret now, but not its heart. And so the story turns, as such stories do, toward a teacher. Among the staff of the school there was a genial and comfortable man named Horace Slughorn, the master of potions and the head of Slytherin House, a man who loved good food and warm company and the quiet pleasure of knowing gifted young people. He kept a favored circle of students, and into that circle he had gladly drawn young Tom Riddle, for the boy was exactly the sort of promising talent that Slughorn delighted to gather near. On certain evenings, the professor would host small gatherings in his study, and there, among the candied fruit and the low firelight, Tom would sit and listen and wait. We come now to one such evening, the fateful hour toward which this whole tale has been drifting. The other students had gone, and the boy lingered as he often did, and in the easy hush of the room he turned the talk, ever so carefully, toward the thing he wished to know. He did not ask outright. He was far too clever for that. He wrapped his question in flattery and idle curiosity, presenting it as the harmless wondering of a bright pupil. And he let the professor believe that the whole idea had drifted up between them by chance. He asked, in a roundabout and gentle way, about that strange word he had found, the name of the magic that could split a soul and anchor it to the living world. And Slughorn, warmed by the fire and by his own fondness for the boy, told him more than he ever should have. He explained, uneasily at first, and then more fully, what the word truly meant. He told the boy that such a thing could indeed be made, that a person might tear away a portion of their own soul through an act of terrible violence and seal that fragment inside an object, so that even if the body were destroyed, that broken piece would remain, tethered to the earth and unable to move on. He warned him that the very act of the tearing was the darkest thing a person could do to their own soul, a wound that could never fully heal. He said the word for such an anchor, a Horcrux, in a low and reluctant voice, as if merely speaking it aloud left a stain on the air. We watched the boy in that moment, and to the professor's eyes, nothing seemed to change. Tom nodded and thanked him, and let the conversation drift gently back towards safer ground. And soon enough he rose and wished the man a peaceful night and slipped away into the dark corridors of the castle. But within him, something had settled into place at last, the final piece of a design he had been assembling for years. He now knew not only that death could be cheated, but exactly how the cheating might be done. And more than that, he had heard from a wiser mouth than the books the one detail they had all left out, that a soul, once split, might be split again. Where the professor had spoken of a single act with a shudder, the boy had already begun to imagine many. That night, walking the quiet stone passages beneath the sleeping towers, Tom Riddle carried the seed of his whole plan, a plan that would in time remake him into something the world had never seen and could scarcely name. The knowing had come to him easily. The doing would not, for the making of such a thing demanded a first and dreadful price, an act from which there could be no turning back, and it was that first crossing, that first breaking of the boundary between a man and a monster, that would set everything else in motion. Up next in Chapter 4, The First Tearing, we'll uncover how the boy who asked became the one who acted, and what it cost him to make the very first anchor for his soul. We left the last chapter with the memory of a quiet boy, the one who leaned close to a kindly old teacher and asked a question that no student had ever asked before. A question about tearing the soul into pieces and hiding them away. That boy carried the answer with him for years, folding it into the private corners of his mind, turning it over the way a person turns a smooth stone in a pocket. And now, in the hush of this chapter, we follow him out of the warm rooms of the castle and into the countryside of his birth, to the moment the old idea first became something real. We come to the first tearing. To understand it, we drift back before the castle, before the potions master and his comfortable armchair, to a small English village tucked among low green hills. There stood a fine old house on a rise above the lanes, a house of stone and tall windows that the local people simply called the Riddle House. It belonged to a well-settled family, people of means who kept their gardens trimmed and their distance from the villagers below. In that house lived an older couple and their grown son, a handsome man who had once, briefly, married a poor girl from the far end of the valley, and then left her when the strangeness of her family became too much for him. He never knew that the girl had been a witch. He never knew that he had a son. The son was Tom. He had grown up far away, in a plain gray building among other children who had no families, and he had learned early to keep his hurts hidden and his cleverness sharp. When at last he discovered the truth of his blood, when he traced the thread back through his mother's people and found the name that had been kept from him, something in him settled into a cold and patient shape. He learned that his father was not some lost figure of legend, but a living man in a comfortable house, a man who had turned away from his mother and left her to fade. And he learned that his mother's own family, the Gaunts, still lingered nearby in a crooked cottage at the wood's edge, the last thin remnant of a line that had once been proud. We watch him travel there in the long light of a summer evening, a young man walking a country road with nothing showy about him, only a stillness that made the birds quiet as he passed. This is the part of the story that the world would later whisper about, and yet we can hold it here without fear, the way one holds a sad old tale at bedtime, knowing it is finished and cannot reach us. We can be tender with it even as we tell it true. In the crooked cottage he found his uncle, a wild and broken man named Morphin, the last of the Gaunts still living there among the dust and the snakes. Morphin knew the boy at once, or thought he did, for the young man wore the family's face. And on Morphin's hand there was a ring, an old and heavy ring set with a black stone, a thing that the Gaunts had guarded for more years than anyone could count. That ring is one of the small treasures our larger story keeps circling back to. So remember it now, the black stone catching the last of the light in a dim and cluttered room. What happened in the Riddle House that night is told in few words, and we will keep those words few. The three people who lived there, the father who had abandoned a witch, and the two elderly parents who had raised him, were found the next morning still and cold, with no mark upon them, and no cause that any ordinary examiner could name. The village never understood it. The doctors never explained it. To the people below the hill, it was simply a grief that arrived without a reason and settled over the fine old house like early frost. We do not linger over the moment itself. We only note that a great and terrible wrong was done quietly in a single evening, and that the young man walked out again into the dark as calmly as he had walked in. Then came the framing, the second cruelty folded inside the first. For the boy did not carry the blame away with him. He went back to the crooked cottage, and with the strange gift he shared with his mother's line, the gift for slipping into another's memory, he reshaped what his uncle believed he had done. Morphin, already frayed and half lost to the world, came to hold in his own mind the conviction that he was the one who had gone up the hill. When the law came for someone, it came for the uncle, and the uncle, believing himself guilty, did not fight it. He was taken away to the wizard prison and left to grow old behind its cold walls, while the true author of the night went free and unsuspected. And the ring, the black-stoned ring of the Gaunts, the young man simply took for himself, sliding it from an accused man's hand as though it had always been meant for him. Now we come to the deepest part of this chapter, the part the title names, and we approach it slowly, the way you would approach a still pond at dusk. The old teacher had told the boy, long ago, that to split the soul a person must commit the gravest of acts, and that in the doing the soul does not simply bruise or bend, it tears. On that night, in that house, on the hill, the tearing happened for the very first time. Something in him that had been whole came apart, and a piece of it loosened and drifted free, ready to be caught and kept and hidden inside an object of his choosing. This was the first tearing, the beginning of all the fragments that our long story will follow, one by one, across the years and across the country. It is a strange and sorrowful thing to picture, a human soul dividing like that, and yet in the hush of these pages, we can hold it gently. We can think of it less as horror and more as a warning carried down through time, a reminder of what a person gives up when they decide that their own endless life is worth more than every bond that ties them to the world. For with that first splitting, he gained a kind of anchor, a way of clinging to life beyond the reach of death. But he lost something far larger. He lost a portion of the very thing that made him human, and he would go on losing more, again and again, until almost nothing of the original remained. We follow the young man away from the village at last, the ring upon his finger, the crime settled onto an innocent man's name, and the first fragment of himself already tucked away where no one would think to look. The hills fold quietly behind him. The fine old house stands empty on its rise, and somewhere in the years ahead, other objects wait to be chosen, ordinary things that will be made to carry pieces of a divided soul, each one hidden with more cunning than the last. But every long journey of hiding begins with a single, humbler vessel, something small enough to be overlooked, plain enough to be mistaken for nothing at all. Before the grand relics and the ancient treasures, before the cup and the locket and the crown, there was a simpler object, one that could be opened and written in and closed again, one that seemed to hold only ink and empty pages. It would prove to be the most patient trap of them all. Up next in Chapter 5, The Diary, we'll uncover how that first quiet vessel was made, how a book with blank pages came to hold a living echo of a torn soul, and how, many years later, it would open its cover to an unsuspecting child. The first tearing is behind us now, and the memory of it settles like snow that has stopped falling. We remember how the young wizard learned to divide what was never meant to be divided, how a single act sealed the smallest piece of himself away from the rest, and how that piece went quiet inside a vessel he had chosen. Nothing about it was loud. The world outside kept turning. The seasons moved through their slow rotations, and only he knew that something had changed in the deep architecture of who he was. From that first wound, a pattern was born, and the pattern would need a keeper, an object that could hold what he had torn free without ever showing the strain of it. Tonight, we follow that fragment into the thing he gave it, and the thing was a book. We call it the Diary, and it is one of the earliest of the 7 vessels he would eventually make. To look at it, a person would see nothing worth a second glance. It was a small volume bound in worn black leather, the kind of ordinary notebook a schoolchild might carry from one lesson to the next. Its cover soft and slightly rounded at the corners, its spine creased from being opened and closed. On the lower edge, someone had once stamped the year of its making, a plain marker of a plain object sold cheaply in a shop that dealt in ink and paper and small necessities. There was no gilding, no lock, no clasp, no ornament of any kind. It was chosen precisely because it looked like nothing at all. We open it in our minds, and we find that every page is blank. This is the first strangeness, and it is a hushed one. A diary is a place where a life is recorded, where days accumulate in a person's own handwriting, where secrets are pressed flat between the leaves like dried flowers. Yet here, the paper is smooth and empty from the first page to the last, unmarked, waiting, pale as milk in low light. A person could turn it over and over and find no entry, no date, no name, nothing at all to suggest that it had ever been used. And yet it had been used more deeply than any ordinary book of memory could ever be. What lived inside it was not written in ink. It was written in something far older and far quieter, folded into the fibers of the paper itself, hidden where no reader could see it. For inside those empty pages lived a memory that had been made whole. The boy who created this vessel had not simply hidden a splinter of his soul within it and left the matter there. He had done something stranger and more patient. He had poured into the book the entire shape of himself as he had been at 16, a full impression of the young man he was in that particular year, the way he thought, the way he reasoned, the manner of his speech, and the turn of his ambition. The fragment of soul gave the impression its life, and the impression gave the fragment a face. Together they formed a version of him that would not age, would not tire, and would not forget. 16 years old forever, sealed in leather and paper, sleeping through the decades with an endless patience that no living person could match. We should pause here on that patience, because it is the tender center of the whole design. The boy who made this book was already looking far ahead, further than most people ever look. He did not build the diary to remember his own days. He built it to reach forward into days he might never see. His plan was written into its very purpose, quiet and exact. One distant year, in a time he could only imagine, the book would find its way into the hands of a reader. That reader would open it, would notice the blank pages, and would perhaps in a lonely or a curious moment, set a pen to the paper and begin to write. And the book would answer, not with ink already there, but with words that rose to meet the reader, drawn up from the memory that slept beneath the surface, as if the pages themselves were listening and were glad to be spoken to at last. This was the quiet menace of the thing, though menace is too sharp a word for the stillness of it. The danger did not announce itself. It waited. It wore the shape of an ordinary object, and it offered the oldest comfort a lonely heart can be offered. The sense that someone, somewhere, understands and is willing to listen. A person who wrote in it would feel heard. A person who confided in it would feel answered. And with every exchange, the 16-year-old boy inside the pages would grow a little more present, a little more real, drawing warmth from the reader the way a cold thing draws heat from a warm hand held against it. The book took slowly, and it took gently, and that was exactly why it could take so much. We remember now the purpose he had chosen for this particular vessel, the task it carried beneath its silence. Long before, in the years when he still walked the corridors of the great castle as a student, he had uncovered a hidden place beneath the school, a chamber sealed by the founder whose blood, he believed, ran in his own veins. Within that chamber slept a creature meant to answer only to his line, and once, as a boy, he had woken it. The diary was made to do that work again. It was designed so that one day, through the hand of some future reader, the chamber could be opened a second time. Its ancient door unsealed, the sleeping thing within roused from its long rest. The book was not only a keeper of soul, it was a key and a plan and a memory of a boy who intended to finish what the boy had started. So the young wizard set the book aside and let the years carry it. He trusted it the way a person trusts a seed planted in autumn, believing without needing to watch that the cold months would pass and the green would rise in its own time. He did not yet know how many more vessels he would make, nor how far his hunger for endless life would eventually pull him. In these early days, the diary stood almost alone, one of the first proofs that his terrible idea could be made real, that a piece of a living soul could truly rest inside a common object and remain there, waiting, whole and unhurried, for as long as the object survived. We hold that image as the night deepens around us. A small black book with soft corners and a stamped year on its edge, lying somewhere out of sight. Its pages blank and its patience vast. Inside it, a boy of 16 dreams a dream that has no ending. And above it, the decades drift by like clouds over a still lake, unnoticed by the sleeper below. There is something almost peaceful in it, if we let ourselves feel it that way. The peace of a thing that has stopped needing to hurry because it believes it has all the time in the world. But the diary was only the beginning of his long design, and it was far from the strangest of the vessels he would choose. In the hills where his mother's family had lived and faded, an old and broken bloodline had left behind a small circle of gold set with a single dark stone, a ring that carried the weight of a name and the ruin of a house. That ring would become his next great secret, and it held more than soul alone. Up next in Chapter 6, The Gaunt Ring, we'll uncover how a battered heirloom from a forgotten cottage became the second vessel of his immortality, and what old and dangerous inheritance he claimed along with it. We leave the diary where we found it, its pages resting once more in the hush of memory, and we let our thoughts drift a little further back into an older shadow and an older stillness. The diary was young, a thing of school days and inked confessions, but the object we turn to now was already ancient when the boy who claimed it was born. If the diary held a fragment of a soul poured into a schoolboy's book, the next relic held something stranger. A splinter of that same soul folded into a piece of gold and stone that had passed through more hands, more sorrows, and more silent years than anyone who touched it could have guessed. We follow the thread from the book to the ring, and the tone changes as we go, growing quieter, heavier, more like the settling of dust in a room no one has entered for a very long time. This is the story of the Gaunt Ring, and to understand it, we must first understand the family whose name it carried. The Gaunts were an old wizarding line, one of the last pure descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself, and by the time we meet them, they had fallen very far from whatever height they once knew. They lived in a small, crooked shack in a hollow near a Muggle village, hidden behind a wall of trees and thorns, in a place where the light came thin and green through tangled branches. The house leaned as if tired. Moss softened its roof, and nettles crowded close against its walls. Inside, the family kept two treasures that they prized above food, above comfort, above the crumbling roof over their heads. One was a golden locket that had belonged to Slytherin. The other was this ring. The ring was a heavy thing, dark and old, set with a large black stone. On the face of that stone, a small mark had been scratched or carved long ago, a simple sign that looked like a triangle with a circle inside it and a straight line drawn down the middle. To the Gaunts, this mark meant only one thing. They believed it was the crest of their ancestors, proof of their noble Slytherin blood, and they wore it and guarded it with a fierce, proud, half-starved devotion. They did not know, and could not have known, what the stone truly was, for that black stone was far more than a family jewel. It was one of the three deathly hallows, the object the old tales called the Resurrection Stone, said to have the power to draw back a faint echo of those who had died. It had been carried down through the centuries, from hand to hand, its origin forgotten, until at last it came to rest on the finger of a poor and prideful family who saw only its darkness and never its depth. We pause here in the quiet of that shabby room and let the weight of it settle, a relic that could touch the border between the living and the dead, worn by people who could barely feed themselves, mistaken for a mere token of ancestry. There is something tender in that blindness, and something sad, and we let both feelings pass over us the way clouds pass over a still pond, without disturbing the calm beneath. Into this hollow, in time, came a young man. He was the grandson of the last of the Gaunts, born of a brief and unhappy union between the Gaunt daughter and a handsome Muggle from the nearby village. That young man had grown into someone brilliant and cold, a wizard of rare and dangerous gifts, and he had gone looking for his mother's family the way a person might go searching for a mirror. He found the shack. He found what remained of his bloodline. And in the course of that visit, in a manner we need not dwell upon, the ring came into his keeping, along with a great and bitter grief that he chose to carry as fuel rather than as sorrow. He took the ring away with him, and for a while it simply traveled with him, a proof of lineage, a private trophy of the Slytherin blood he so treasured in himself. But this young man, whom the world would later know by another name, had already begun the terrible work of dividing his own soul. He had learned the oldest and darkest of protections, the making of a vessel to hold a torn piece of himself so that death could never fully claim him. The diary had been the first. The ring was to become another. And so, at some quiet point in his long descent, he took this heavy dark ring, with its black resurrection stone that he never recognized for what it was, and he worked upon it the deepest of his cruel enchantments. He anchored a fragment of his soul within it. The ring became a Horcrux, a hiding place for a splinter of a living will, and in that moment an object that had once meant only family, and once held the promise of the dead, was bound instead to the endless refusal of a single man to ever truly leave the world. Now we come to the hiding, which is the heart of our chapter. Having made the ring into one of his most precious safeguards, he did not carry it with him into the wide world. Instead, he brought it back to the place where it had begun, to the ruined Gaunt shack in its overgrown hollow, and he concealed it there beneath the very floor of that abandoned house. The family was gone by then, scattered and dead, and the shack had been left to rot in silence, its windows dark, its doors sagging, its rooms slowly surrendering to weeds and weather. To any passing eye it was nothing, a forgotten ruin that no sane person would enter. And that was precisely the point. He hid the ring in the least regarded corner of his own beginnings, trusting that no one would ever think to dig beneath the boards of a place so poor and so forsaken. Yet he did not trust the ruin alone to keep his secret. Around the buried ring, he laid protections of a kind few could hope to break, powerful curses woven into the hiding place, patient and cruel, waiting in the dark for any hand that might reach too far. These enchantments were not built merely to conceal. They were built to punish. Anyone who found the ring and tried to claim it would meet a curse of such strength that it could not be undone by ordinary means, a slow and certain harm folded invisibly around the small, dark circle of gold. So the ring lay there, year after year, in a box or a hollow beneath the floorboards, wrapped in silence above and in deadly magic all around. A splinter of a soul resting inside the greatest of relics, inside the humblest of tombs. We might picture it now, in the last soft light of this chapter. The hollow full of the sound of leaves, the shack sinking gently into the earth, the floor unswept, the air unmoving, and somewhere beneath the rotting boards, a heaviness that the birds and the field mice sensed and avoided without knowing why. Above, the seasons turned, snow and thaw, and green and gold, and the ruin kept its secret through all of them. Below, the ring waited, holding two great mysteries at once: the mystery of the stone that whispered of the dead, and the mystery of the soul that clung so desperately to life. Neither the wizarding world nor the Muggle village nearby had any notion of what slept in that ground. It was a hiding so complete that it seemed the ring might rest there undisturbed until the very end of the world. But of course, it did not. And even as this relic lay buried and cursed in its lonely hollow, another treasure of the same fallen family was making its own long and secret journey elsewhere. A golden locket that had once hung in that very shack and had since passed out into stranger and darker hands. Up next in Chapter 7, Slytherin's Locket, we'll uncover how that ancient piece of Slytherin gold slipped away from the Gaunts, what price was paid for it in the shadows, and where a second splinter of the same restless soul was hidden far from any prying eye. In the last chapter, we lingered in the crumbling shadow of the Gaunt house, where a small ring of gold and blackened stone held more sorrow than any single object ought to hold. We watched a proud and broken family fold in on itself, and we watched a young man walk away from that ruin, carrying something he believed made him greater than the wizards who had come before him. The ring was hidden, the family was scattered, and yet the hunger that had driven Tom Riddle back to that place had not been satisfied. A ring was only one anchor, and one anchor was not enough for a soul that meant to outlast the centuries. So tonight, we drift a little further along that same slow current, and we let it carry us toward another treasure, older and heavier, a thing of gold that had rested against the throat of one of the founders of Hogwarts himself. We come now to Slytherin's Locket, and we let the name settle over us like a warm weight, because this object had a long and winding life before it ever became a vessel for something darker. Long before Tom Riddle was born, the locket belonged to Salazar Slytherin, one of the 4 great founders whose story we have followed through these quiet chapters. It was a heavy thing of pure gold, shaped like an oval and marked upon its face with a serpentine letter, a graceful curling S wrought from many small green stones. Those stones caught the light the way still water catches the moon, and anyone who held the locket felt at once that it was old, that it had passed through many hands, that it had been made in an age when craftsmen worked slowly and poured meaning into every line. For centuries it descended through Salazar's bloodline, handed from parent to child, a proof of who they were and where they had come from. Until at last it came into the keeping of the Gaunts, that same fated family we visited in the chapter before this one. The Gaunts had almost nothing left of their former greatness. Their house was small and dim, their fortune long spent, their pride the only thing they still possessed in abundance. Yet they clung to two heirlooms, as though these alone kept them tethered to a nobler past. One was the ring we have already spoken of. The other was this golden locket, which they treasured above nearly everything, believing it marked them as the true and final heirs of Slytherin. When the family fell apart, when the son was sent away and the daughter left alone, that daughter, poor and desperate and heavy with child, carried the locket into the Muggle city and, in her hunger and her grief, sold it for a handful of coins that were far, far less than its worth. She died soon after, and the locket passed on, out of the bloodline at last, into the wider world of buyers and collectors. We follow it now across the years, from hand to hand, until it comes to rest in the collection of a wealthy woman named Hepzibah Smith. She was an old and rather grand lady who loved beautiful things, who filled her home with treasures and jewels and delicate objects of every kind, and who took particular pride in two of them above all the rest. One was a small golden cup that we will meet again very soon. The other was this locket of Slytherin, which she kept wrapped in soft cloth inside a fine leather box, and which she would bring out to admire when the mood took her. Into her comfortable world came a young man who worked for a shop that dealt in rare and precious things. He was charming and clever and lovely to look upon, and Hepzibah delighted in his visits. She trusted him. She showed him her treasures. She lifted the lid on that leather box and let him gaze upon the ancient gold, and she told him proudly of its history, of how it had belonged to Slytherin himself. She could not have known what stirred behind the young man's calm and pleasant face, for this was Tom Riddle, and the sight of that locket woke in him a longing so deep and so cold that it settled the matter at once. He meant to have it. He meant to have both the locket and the cup, because in his mind these were not merely valuables. They were relics of the founders, objects steeped in centuries of magic and meaning, and they were exactly the vessels his growing plan required. What happened next was quiet and terrible. Hepzibah Smith died, and it was made to look as though age or accident had taken her, though the truth was that Riddle had ended her life in order to take what she owned. The locket and the cup vanished from her collection, and the blame was cast elsewhere upon a servant whose memory had been tampered with, so that no shadow fell on the smiling young man who had already slipped away with his prizes. We do not dwell on the horror of it here, in this hushed place made for rest. We note only that the locket had now passed into the hands of someone who intended to use it in a way its makers could never have imagined. For Tom Riddle did to the locket what he had done to the ring. Through an act of deliberate darkness, he tore away a piece of his own soul and sealed it inside the golden shell, so that the object became far more than an heirloom. It became a Horcrux, an anchor holding a fragment of him to the world of the living, a hidden root that would keep him from dying even if his body were destroyed. The locket that had once rested against the throat of a founder now cradled something unnatural, a splinter of a man who feared death above all things. And because this fragment was so precious to him, Riddle could not simply leave the locket in a drawer or a vault. He carried it far away, to a place he remembered from the earliest and most wounding days of his childhood. A wild stretch of coast where dark cliffs dropped into a cold and restless sea. There, hidden behind the tumbling waves, lay the mouth of a cave, and beyond that mouth a deeper cavern that could be reached only by those who knew its secret. In this hollow beneath the rock, he built a fortress of enchantments to guard the locket. Layers of cruel and cunning magic laid one upon another. There was a wall that would open only for one who offered a payment of pain. There was a black lake, still and silent, where pale and grasping things waited beneath the surface. And at the center of that lake stood a small island, and on the island a stone basin filled with a potion that no thief could pass without drinking. A potion brewed to bring despair and thirst and dread to anyone who dared to empty the cup. At the bottom of that basin, beneath the dark and bitter liquid, the locket lay waiting. Riddle had woven every enchantment with a single purpose, to make certain that no one could ever reach his treasure, and that anyone who tried would suffer for it. He believed the locket was safe forever. He believed his soul, split now across ring and locket and other vessels still to come, was beyond the reach of any enemy. And so he left the cave and its silent lake behind, confident that a piece of him would endure there in the dark long after the world above had forgotten his name. We leave the locket there tonight, resting in its cold cradle beneath the water, its golden face turned away from the light, holding its terrible secret in perfect stillness. But it was not the only relic Riddle had taken from Hepzibah Smith's collection on that fateful day. There was, as we have said, a second treasure, a small golden cup marked with the emblem of a badger, once the cherished possession of another founder entirely. Up next in Chapter 8, Hufflepuff's Cup, we'll uncover how that gentle vessel of Helga Hufflepuff came to be twisted into yet another anchor of an undying soul, and where a fragment of Tom Riddle was hidden away to sleep behind a different and no less dangerous guard. We leave the locket resting in the shadow of its cavern, that heavy oval of Salazar Slytherin sunk beneath still black water, and we let our thoughts rise back toward the surface of the world. The locket was only one thread in a long and patient design, and as we drift onward, we begin to follow another. Where the locket carried the weight of a serpent and the cold pride of one founder, our next resting place carries something warmer to look at, though it was bent to the very same purpose. We move from silver to gold, from the green depths of the sea cave to a soft and buttery gleam, and we come to rest before a small and gentle object that history would remember as Hufflepuff's Cup. To understand the cup, we travel back to a quiet house filled with treasures, the home of an old and wealthy witch named Hepzibah Smith. She was a collector, tender toward her belongings, and she kept them cushioned in silk and hidden in soft leather cases. Among all her hoarded beauties, two shone brighter than the rest in her memory. One was the locket, whose journey we have already traced. The other was a little golden vessel, no larger than could be cradled in two cupped hands, its surface worked with fine and loving craft. Upon one side, worn smooth by centuries of admiring fingers, stood the badger, the patient emblem of Helga Hufflepuff, the founder who had valued kindness and steady labor above cleverness or ambition. The badger was engraved into the metal as if it had always been there, calm and unhurried, watching the world go by with the slow gaze of a creature content in its own burrow. Helga Hufflepuff had lived nearly 1,000 years before, in the far green days when the four founders first raised their castle among the lochs and the hills. Of all of them, she was the most welcoming, the one who took in the students the others overlooked. and the little cup was said to have passed down through her descendants like a warm coal kept alive from an old fire. By the time it reached Hepzibah Smith, that long inheritance had thinned to a single delicate thing sitting in a padded box, a keepsake of gold that meant home and hearth and belonging. Into this soft and cluttered house came a young man who seemed, at first, only polite and admiring. He worked in those years at a shop that bought and sold rare objects, and he had learned to make his voice smooth and his manner easy. Hepzibah, charmed and a little lonely, took pleasure in showing him her finest pieces, and so she drew out the locket and the cup and laid them before his eager eyes. She told him, in her fond and rambling way, that the little golden cup had once belonged to Helga Hufflepuff herself, and that it held quiet powers she had never fully explored. The young man listened, and beneath his gentle attention, something patient and hungry stirred. His name in those days was Tom Riddle, though the world would later learn to fear a different name entirely. We need not linger on the sadness that followed, for we are here to rest, not to grieve. It is enough to say that Hepzibah did not keep her treasures long after that visit, and that when the golden cup and the silver locket slipped out of her house, they slipped also out of the light of ordinary history. Tom Riddle carried them away into the shadows of his own becoming, and there, over the slow years, he did to the cup what he had already begun to do to other objects. He hollowed a place inside it, not with any tool of gold or steel, but with the darkest magic he had ever learned, and into that hidden place he poured a fragment of his own divided soul. This was the nature of the thing he made. A Horcrux was an anchor, a small piece of a person set apart from the body and sealed within an ordinary object, so that even if the body should fail, the anchored fragment would hold fast and the whole would not be lost. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff, that badge of warmth and welcome, was chosen to become one of these anchors, and so a vessel that had once meant hospitality was turned, quietly, into a vessel of survival. It did not change on the outside. The badger still watched with its patient eyes. The gold still gave back the same buttery gleam, and only within, where no ordinary gaze could reach, did the little cup now carry a sleeping splinter of a soul. Such a treasure could not be left on any open shelf. Tom Riddle, grown now into the master of a following of devoted and dangerous witches and wizards, needed a keeper he could trust beyond all others, and he found one in a woman named Bellatrix Lestrange. She was among the most loyal of all who served him, fierce and unwavering, and to her he gave the golden cup with the understanding that it was a thing of enormous worth, though she did not know the whole of its secret. Bellatrix took the burden as an honor, and she carried it to the safest place her family commanded, a place woven so tightly with protections that few in the world would ever dare to test them. That place was a vault sunk deep beneath the ancient bank of Gringotts, far below the marble halls and the winding stairs, down where the tunnels grow old and the air turns cool and heavy. The Lestrange vault lay among the oldest and most guarded chambers of the goblins, reached only after a long descent through the dark. Bellatrix set the cup within, and around it the vault kept watch with enchantments of a rare and cunning cruelty. Anything that touched the wrong object without leave would blossom into scorching heat, so that a careless hand might meet a sudden flowering of fire. And worse, or perhaps stranger, the treasures themselves were bound with a spell of multiplication, so that the lightest brush would cause them to swell and copy and pour forth in a rising tide of burning gold, each duplicate as searing and as hollow as the last, until an intruder might be buried and scalded beneath a heap of counterfeit riches. So, the little cup of Helga Hufflepuff came to rest in the deepest kind of hiding, tucked upon a high shelf among goblets and coins and heirlooms, guarded by fire and by endless false reflections of itself. There it sat through long years, patient as the badger it bore, while above it the world turned and the wizarding age moved toward its great reckoning. It waited in the cold beneath the earth, a soft gleam in the dark, holding its sleeping fragment as faithfully as a hearthstone holds the memory of a fire long gone out. We may leave it there for now, safe in its heavy quiet, and let our own thoughts grow slow and warm at the thought of gold resting in the dark. The cup will keep, its badger will not stir, and the fire that guards it burns on without heat for those who never come near, a distant and untroubling glow at the bottom of the world. Yet the golden cup was not the last of the treasures the founders left behind, nor the last that was turned toward this shadowed purpose. Helga Hufflepuff gave her badger and her warmth. Salazar Slytherin gave his serpent and his locket. And there remained still the gifts of the two who founded the castle beside them. One of those, a thing of silver and starlight belonging to the wisest of the four, had vanished from the world so long ago that many believed it only a legend. Its story is stranger and older than the cups, and it leads us to a gray and grieving figure who wandered the halls of the school for centuries. Up next in Chapter 9, Ravenclaw's Diadem, we'll uncover how a lost crown of wisdom slipped out of history, and how it too was drawn at last into the same patient design. We left the small golden cup resting in the dark, that gleaming relic of Helga Hufflepuff, tucked away behind stone and enchantment where it could sleep for years without being seen. From that hidden vault, our thoughts drift now towards something lighter in shape and heavier in sorrow, a slender circlet of silver and sapphire that once rested upon a scholar's brow. If the cup was warmth and welcome, this next object was thought itself made into metal, and its long wandering carries us across mountains and forests and back again to the very halls where our story began. So we let the cup fade softly from view, and we turn to follow the strange and winding path of Ravenclaw's diadem. Long before it became a thing of shadow, the diadem belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the four, who raised the great castle in the misty north more than 1,000 years ago. She was, by every account that survives, the cleverest witch of her age, a woman who loved learning the way others love bread or fire, as a thing needed for living. She prized wit and intellect above all, and it was said that the diadem she wore did more than adorn her. Legend held that it sharpened the mind of whoever wore it, that it lent clarity to muddled thought and made wisdom easier to reach. Whether that was truly its power or only the reverence of those who admired her, the circlet became bound up with her name, a small crown of insight carried by the wisest of the founders. Yet even the wise carry private griefs, and Rowena's deepest sorrow wore the face of her own daughter. Helena Ravenclaw, whom later ages would come to know as the Grey Lady, grew up in the shadow of her mother's brilliance, and something in her longed to step out of that shade and shine on her own. In a moment of restless pride, she took the diadem, that treasure her mother loved, and she fled with it far from home. She carried it across the sea and hid herself away, hoping perhaps that the circlet would make her cleverer than the woman who bore her, or simply that possessing it would make her feel, at last, like someone whole. The story of how Helena ended her days is a tender and painful one, and we tell it here softly, the way one recalls an old grief that no longer stings but still aches faintly in the quiet. She had traveled into the wild woods of Albania, into a forest thick with ancient trees, and there she hid the diadem inside the hollow trunk of one such tree, folding it into the dark heart of the wood as though returning a secret to the earth. Her mother, falling ill and wishing to see her only child once more before the end, sent a man who had loved Helena to find her and bring her home. He found her among those Albanian trees, but she would not come. And in a grief and anger that overtook him, he did a terrible thing from which he could never turn back. Both of them passed from the world of the living in that far forest, and both returned as ghosts to the castle they had loved, she as the pale and silent Grey Lady of Ravenclaw Tower, he as the sorrowful, bloody Baron. And through all the long centuries after, the place where she had hidden the diadem stayed her own quiet secret, spoken to no one, guarded not by lock or spell, but simply by her refusal to tell. Here our path bends toward a younger figure, a clever and hollow-hearted student named Tom Riddle, whom the years would twist into something colder. Even as a boy at Hogwarts, he had a gift for drawing secrets out of the unwilling, for making people feel he understood them, for gathering knowledge the way a magpie gathers bright things. He learned that a ghost walked the halls who had once been Rowena Ravenclaw's daughter, and he set himself patiently to win her trust. Where others found the Grey Lady remote and unreachable, he was gentle and attentive, and in time she let slip to him the thing she had told no living soul, the tale of the stolen diadem and the hollow tree in the Albanian wood where it lay waiting. She had never guessed what use he would make of such a confidence, and by the time the weight of her mistake settled upon her, it was already far too late to call the words back. So it was that Tom Riddle, grown now and set upon his long and terrible work, traveled into that same forest of Albania and searched among the old trees until he found the one the Grey Lady had described. Reaching into the hollow, he drew out the diadem that had lain there in darkness for centuries, its silver dimmed by time, yet its sapphire still deep and clear. In his hands, the wise woman's crown became something else entirely. By then, he had already learned the darkest of arts, the splitting of the soul into pieces so that no single death could ever claim the whole of him. And he chose this recovered treasure to hold one such fragment. Into the diadem he poured a torn shard of himself, so that the circlet of insight now cradled a sliver of a soul that had turned away from every kind of light. It was, in its way, a bitter mockery of all Rowena had stood for, wisdom hollowed out and filled with the fear of dying. For a long while afterward, the diadem kept traveling, hidden and carried and hidden again, until at last it came home to the one place its maker had loved best. Riddle brought it back to Hogwarts, to the castle in the hills, and there he found the perfect hiding place. A room that few ever discovered, and fewer still understood. High in the 7th floor corridor there was a chamber that came and went according to need, a space the school called the Room of Requirement, which shaped itself to whatever a seeker most desired. Over uncounted generations, students and staff who wished to conceal something had found their way into one particular version of that room. A vast and echoing hall piled high with the leavings of 1,000 years. Broken furniture and forgotten books, cracked potion bottles and rusted armor, love letters and cheating quills and stolen sweets, all of it heaped in towering aisles like a city built of things people wished to forget. Into this great labyrinth of the abandoned Tom Riddle walked with the diadem in hand, and there he set it down among the endless clutter, trusting that a treasure hidden among 10,000 treasures would never be noticed at all. He believed, as he believed of all his hidden soul pieces, that he alone knew the secret of that place, that no other living person had ever glimpsed the room in its hoarding shape, or would ever think to look for a founder's crown beneath a moth-eaten hat and a stack of warping shelves. And so, the lost diadem of Ravenclaw came to rest in the heart of the school, a quiet danger sleeping in a sea of quiet things, waiting through the long, slow years for a day of reckoning it could not imagine. It is a strange and gentle irony, when we lie here and turn it over in the mind, that the wisest of the founders should have her treasure end its journey buried in a mountain of the discarded. And that a fragment of a fearful soul should sleep so near the very tower where her daughter still drifted, pale and silent, keeping her old secret. The circlet had traveled from a scholar's brow to a hollow tree to a room that hid 1,000 years of loss, and it would lie there undisturbed while other pieces of the same broken soul waited elsewhere in the world. For one of those pieces did not sleep in stone or metal at all. It moved, it breathed, it followed its master through shadow with the slow patience of a great and living thing. Up next, in Chapter 10, The Serpent Nagini, we'll uncover how a soul could be hidden not in an object but in a creature, and why this last companion was the most watchful vessel of them all. We leave the diadem where it rested, that thin circlet of silver and sapphire that Rowena Ravenclaw once wore, hidden away in a forgotten room and layered under the dust of centuries, and we let its cold and patient glimmer fade behind us. It was a thing of the past, an object stolen and enchanted and left to sleep in the high tower of an ancient castle. Where we travel now, the story turns away from crowns and cups and lockets, away from all the polished relics of a vanished world, and it moves towards something warmer, something that breathes, something that lives. We follow the trail of Lord Voldemort, not into a vault or a cave this time, but into the quiet hush of a body that draws air and turns its slow eyes toward the firelight. This is the chapter of the Serpent Nagini, and here the shape of the tale changes entirely. A Horcrux, as we have come to understand across these long and hushed nights, is a vessel. It is a container, carved or forged or grown to hold a torn piece of a human soul, split away by the deepest and darkest act a wizard can commit. Until now, every vessel we have watched has been an object. A diary bound in worn leather, a ring set with a rough black stone, a heavy golden locket engraved with a serpentine letter, a small cup of hammered gold, a lost diadem of silver. All of them were things, still and silent, waiting on shelves and in shadows for a hand to disturb them. But the rarest kind of vessel, the strangest and the most perilous, is not a thing at all. It is a creature that lives and moves and knows hunger. And into such a creature Voldemort placed the sixth and final deliberate fragment of himself. That creature was a great snake, and her name was Nagini. We watch her now in the low glow of some borrowed room, coiled in slow loops upon a rug, or draped across the arm of a chair, her long body thick as a strong man's leg, her scales the muted green of moss under river water. She is enormous, far larger than any ordinary serpent of field or forest, and there is an old and heavy stillness in her. The stillness of a thing that has watched many things happen and has not once looked away. Her eyes are narrow and yellow, and they do not blink as we expect a creature's eyes to blink. When she moves without haste, pouring herself over the floor the way water pours, quiet and certain, and the firelight slides along her back in ribbons that shimmer and vanish. To carry a soul inside a living thing is the most dangerous of all the choices a dark wizard can make, and we come to understand slowly why this is so. An object endures. A cup does not grow old, a ring does not sicken, a diadem does not tire, or wander off or fall to some ordinary accident of the world. An object can be buried in the deepest cave or sealed behind 100 spells and simply left there, changeless, for 1,000 years. But a living creature is fragile in ways no metal is fragile. It can be wounded. It can be hunted. It can be struck down by blade or curse in a single unguarded moment. And if it dies while the fragment sleeps inside it, then that fragment dies with it and is lost forever. To trust a shard of one's own soul to a beating heart is to gamble that the heart will keep beating. And few things in this world are less certain than that. and so almost no dark wizard in all the long and shadowed history of the craft ever dared it. Voldemort dared it, because Voldemort feared death more than any wizard who had ever lived, and because he had come to believe that his snake would never leave his side. This choice came later than the others. We must set it in its proper place in the long arc of his making. The diary belonged to his young years, when he was still Tom Riddle and still walked the corridors of Hogwarts as a clever and hollow boy. The ring came from the ruined house of the Gaunts, his mother's cursed and crumbling line. The locket and the cup were gathered in the hungry years that followed, stolen from a lonely woman who trusted him. But the binding of the soul into Nagini did not come in those early seasons of his rise. It came far later, after his first fall and his long exile as something less than a ghost, after he had drifted for more than a decade as a torn and formless thing, and only then, when he had clawed his way back into a body of his own, did he make his snake into a vessel. She was the Horcrux of his second life, the one forged in the years of his return, and this is part of what set her apart from all the rest. Because she was made so late, and because she was made of living flesh, Voldemort kept her closer than he kept anything. The other fragments he scattered and hid, tucking them into caves and vaults and towers across the length of the country, trusting distance and secrecy to guard them. But Nagini he would not scatter, for she was too precious and too vulnerable to be left alone in some dark corner of the world. She stayed near him, always, curled at the foot of his chair, gliding through the rooms where he plodded, resting in the warmth of whatever fire he sat beside. Where he went, she was carried or she followed, and in the long silences of his brooding, she was the only living warmth in the room. There was something almost tender in it, if such a word can be spoken of him at all, the way the coldest of all wizards kept one soft and breathing thing forever within reach. And when even nearness did not feel like enough, he wrapped her in an enchantment. In the last of his days, he wove around her a shield of magic, a shimmering and unseen sphere that hung in the air about her body and turned aside the blades and curses that might have found her. We can picture it as a faint distortion in the light, a bending of the air like heat above a summer road, a barrier that no ordinary blow could pierce. He had learned, by then, how much depended on her survival. She was not merely a companion and not merely a weapon. She was a seventh part of his very being, a shard of the thing he called his soul, housed in a creature that ate and slept and dreamed whatever dreams a serpent dreams, and if she fell, then a part of him fell with her. So he guarded her as a miser guards the last coin of a lost fortune, with a care that bordered on love and yet was only ever fear. We linger a while longer on the strangeness of it, on the quiet wonder of a soul poured into scale and muscle and slow, cold blood. Somewhere behind those unblinking yellow eyes there swam a fragment of a human self, a splinter of the boy who had once been Tom, buried so deep that perhaps even the snake did not know it was there. She hunted and she rested and she wound herself through the shadows of his hidden houses, and all the while she carried within her a secret weight that no creature was ever meant to bear. Of all the 7 pieces into which he had broken himself, she was the only one that could look back at the world with living eyes, the only one that could feel the fire's heat and the cold of the stone floor, the only one that was, in her own dim and serpentine way, alive. The story of the Horcruxes could have ended here, with 6 deliberate vessels made and hidden, 5 of dead metal and 1 of living scale, the whole slow work of a lifetime laid out at last. But it does not end here, for there was a 7th piece of soul that Voldemort never meant to make, a fragment torn loose by accident on a night of ruin and sealed inside the last vessel he would ever have chosen. A vessel that walked and breathed and grew, and one day would come looking for him. Up next in Chapter 11, The Boy Who Became a Vessel, we'll uncover how a single curse rebounded in a quiet nursery and lodged a stray shard of the darkest wizard alive inside the one child he had come to destroy. We left the great Serpent Nagini coiled in the shadows of her master's keeping, the living vessel who breathed and hunted and slept, a Horcrux with a heartbeat, warm where the others were cold. She was the last of the pieces that Voldemort chose on purpose, the last soul fragment sealed by a deliberate hand and a deliberate cruelty. And so we might imagine that the tally is complete, that the accounting of his broken soul is finished. 6 vessels scattered across the years and the miles, each one a small anchor holding him to the world of the living. But there is one more. There is a 7th piece that no one intended, that Voldemort himself did not know he had made, hidden in the most unlikely vessel of all. Tonight we turn to that quiet mystery, and to the boy who became a vessel without ever being asked. His name was Harry, and on the night this story begins, he was 1 year old, small and sleeping in a house in a village called Godric's Hollow. The village was old and gentle, a scatter of cottages and a little church, a graveyard soft with moss, hedgerows silvered by the late October frost. Inside one of those cottages, a fire burned low, and a mother moved through the rooms the way mothers do at the end of a long day, tidying, humming, checking the latch on the window. She was young and she was brave, and her name was Lily. In the nursery upstairs, her son lay in his cot with his dark hair already unruly, his eyes the same green as hers, his small hands curled loosely against the blanket. He knew nothing of what was coming. He knew only warmth and milk and the low music of a house that loved him. We should hold that image for a moment, because it is the last moment of the ordinary. A child asleep, a mother near, a father downstairs with his wand set aside and his guard lowered by the false peace of a quiet evening. They believed themselves hidden. A charm had been woven around the house, a secret kept inside the heart of a trusted friend, and they trusted that the secret would hold. It did not hold. Somewhere in the dark, a figure was walking toward the village, tall and thin and certain, his soul already torn into so many pieces that little remained of the man he had once been. He had heard a prophecy, or the fragment of one, and he had decided that this small sleeping child was the one it named. He came to end a life before it could grow into a threat. What happened next is known in its outline to every witch and wizard of that world, though the deepest part of it was known to almost no one. Voldemort entered the house. He climbed the stairs. He faced the mother in the nursery, and though he offered her the chance to step aside, she would not. She placed herself between the intruder and the cot, and when the green light came, she fell without ever raising a wand to save herself, only her arms lifted toward her son. That refusal, that willing gift of her own life for his, laid an old and quiet magic over the child, a protection woven not from spells or runes, but from love freely given. It settled into his skin like warmth into stone. He would not understand it for many years. Neither would his enemy. Then, Voldemort turned to the boy. He raised his wand a second time, and he spoke the words that had ended so many lives before, the curse that leaves no mark and needs no reason, and the green light leapt toward the child in the cot. And here the story bends away from every expectation. The curse struck, but it did not take. Where it should have ended a small life, it rebounded instead, turned back upon its caster by the ancient shelter his mother had left behind. The light that was meant for the child returned to the man, and it tore through him, and his body was undone in an instant. He did not die, not truly, for too many pieces of him were hidden elsewhere to let death close its hand around him fully. But the thing that had been standing in that nursery was ripped apart, flung out of its own flesh, scattered into something less than a ghost and more than a memory. And in that same breaking, in the violence of that undoing, something small and dark broke loose. His soul, already so worn and thin from all the tearing he had done to it, splintered once more. But this last splintering was not chosen. It was not sealed inside a diary or a ring or a cup by careful ritual. It was an accident, a chip flung off in the moment of shattering, and it had nowhere to go and no one to hold it except the only living soul in that room. It latched onto the infant. It fastened to the boy who had just survived the unsurvivable, and it burrowed in, unbidden and unwilling, on both sides. A fragment of the darkest wizard of the age lodged inside the child who had defeated him. In that instant, Harry became what no one designed him to be, an unintended vessel, a seventh piece of a soul that was never meant to have a seventh piece. The only mark it left, that anyone could see, was small. A thin scar in the shape of a lightning bolt, high on the boy's forehead, pale and clean. For years, those who looked at it would call it a token of survival, a badge of the night he lived when he should have died. And it was that, but it was also a door, a faint seam between two minds that should never have touched, a place where the fragment inside him pressed close to the surface. Through that seam, in the years to come, the boy would sometimes feel things that were not his own. He would feel a distant anger flare when the shattered wizard grew strong again. He would dream dreams that belonged to another. He would feel his scar burn, a low ache like a coal beneath the skin, whenever the darkness that had marked him drew near. This is the terrible and tender heart of it, the part we turn over quietly in the dark. The boy carried a piece of his enemy and did not know. For most of his childhood, he did not even know that magic was real, let alone that a sliver of a murderer's soul slept behind his scar. He grew up small and overlooked in an ordinary house, unaware that he was one of the rarest things in his world, a living Horcrux who breathed and laughed and skinned his knees, a vessel that had a name and a heart, and no idea what it held. The bond between them was real and it was constant, a thread that neither of them chose, stretched across all the years between that October night and the war still waiting far ahead. It made them mirrors. It made them, in a strange and sorrowful way, kin, and it meant something that would not be understood until the very end. For a soul cannot be fully destroyed while any of its anchors remain. As long as the fragment lived inside the boy, the man it came from could not truly die. The child who had survived the killing curse had become, without knowing it, the one thing standing between his enemy and the grave. The story of how that came to be understood and what it would ask of him is a long road still to travel. But before we walk it, we must follow the shattered wizard's own return and the hunt for the pieces of him that lay hidden in secret places. One of those places waited far from any village, in the dark beneath the sea, guarded by cold water and colder magic. Up next in Chapter 12, The Cave by the Sea, we'll uncover how Voldemort chose that drowned and hidden hollow to hide a fragment of his soul, and the cruel defenses he wove around it to keep any seeker from ever reaching what lay within. There is a tenderness in remembering that the boy who lived carried a sliver of his enemy inside him, quiet and unasked for. A passenger he never invited and never fully understood. That fragment slept in Harry the way an old song sleeps in a house, present but unspoken, felt more than heard. And in learning that he himself was one of the hidden pieces, we come to understand something wider and stranger, that the shattered soul had been scattered across the world on purpose, tucked into objects and places chosen for their secrecy, so that each fragment might rest undisturbed for as long as time allowed. The hunting of those pieces and the hiding of them is the story that carries us now, and it leads us to a lonely stretch of shore and a hollow in the rock that the sea has been visiting for longer than any wizard has lived. This is the tale of the cave by the sea. The cave sits at the base of a high, dark cliff, in a place the young Tom Riddle first found as a child, long before he took the name that later made grown men flinch. In those early years, he had traveled there with the other orphans of the city, brought to the coast for a holiday that was meant to be a kindness. While the others played on the pale sand, he had wandered alone, drawn to the water and to the black opening in the cliff face that the tide half swallowed and half revealed. He had frightened 2 of the children there, in that dim and dripping place, and he had never forgotten the feeling of power it gave him, nor the way the cave seemed to keep its secrets for him alone. Years later, when he needed a hiding place worthy of a fragment of his soul, he returned to that remembered dark and made of it a fortress. To reach the true chamber, one had to pass through the outer cave and then cross a barrier of enchanted stone, a wall that showed no door and offered no seam. The way through it was sealed not by a key of metal, but by a price of blood. A visitor had to wound himself and offer that small crimson toll to the rock, as if the cliff itself demanded proof that any who entered had suffered to come so far. It was a cruel and simple lock, for it meant that the very act of pursuit left the pursuer weaker, opened and bleeding before the trial had even begun. Beyond that wall lay a vast inner cavern, and at its heart, a lake of black water lay perfectly still, so dark and so smooth that it seemed less like water than like a hole cut into the world. Around the edges of that lake and beneath its glassy surface waited the sleepers. They were the inferi, the bodies of the dead bound by dark enchantment to guard the place, pale and thin and patient, resting in the cold water until something should stir them. They did not hunger, and they did not dream. They simply waited, arranged like a drowned army, ready to rise at the first sign of theft. To disturb the water carelessly was to wake them, and so the lake itself became a moat of the dead, a barrier that punished haste and rewarded only those who understood its hidden rules. At the center of the lake stood a small island of smooth stone, and upon it rested a basin of pale, glowing green liquid. This was the heart of the defense, and perhaps the most sorrowful of all its cruelties. The potion could not be moved aside, could not be frozen or banished or scooped away. It could only be drunk, and it had been brewed to fill the drinker with despair. Each swallow poured cold dread into the mind, dragging up every old grief and every private fear, and it left behind a burning thirst so fierce that the victim would crawl toward the black lake to drink, and the lake, of course, was full of waiting hands. It was a trap folded inside a trap, designed so that the taking of the treasure would break the taker in body and in spirit both. Beneath that potion, at the very bottom of the basin, lay a locket, small and heavy and gold. Into this place, on one dark night near the end of his long life, came the old headmaster and the boy he had grown to love as a grandson. The elder wizard was already failing, his hand blackened by an earlier wound that no cure could fully mend, and yet he insisted on being the one to drink. They had crossed the sea and climbed down the cliff. They had opened the wall with a wound freely given, and they had summoned a slender boat that lay hidden beneath the black surface, a vessel meant to carry only one grown soul at a time across the still water. Together, they went out upon the lake, gliding past the pale shapes below, without waking them, moving with the careful slowness that the place demanded. Upon the island, the old man began to drink. The boy held the goblet and gave him each measure, one after another, watching the potion do its terrible work. The headmaster, so steady and so wise across all the years, was pulled down into visions of old sorrows and private guilts, pleading with shadows only he could see, begging for an end to some pain that belonged to his own hidden past. The boy pressed on because he had promised he would, because the man had made him swear to keep pouring no matter what he saw or heard. It was, for both of them, an act of love wearing the mask of cruelty, a trust so complete that it could ask for suffering and be obeyed. When the basin at last stood empty, the locket lay bare, and the boy lifted it free. But the drinking had woken a thirst that would not be denied, and when the old man reached for the black water, the sleepers stirred. Pale hands broke the surface. The inferi rose in their silent multitude and began to close in, drawn toward the warmth of the living. And for a moment, the island seemed lost. It was the old wizard, roused by need from his stupor, who drove them back with a ring of fire that curled across the water and held the dead at bay long enough for the two of them to reach the boat and cross again to the far shore. They climbed, spent and shaking, back through the wall and out into the salt air. And there, in the quiet, after so much peril, came the strangest turn of all. When they looked upon the locket they had bled and suffered to win, they found that it was not the treasure they had sought. It was heavier than it should have been, and yet it opened easily, and inside there was no fragment of soul at all, only a small folded note. Someone had come here before them, someone who had known the secret of the cave and had solved its riddles, and had taken the true locket away, leaving this hollow copy in its place as a final, quiet mockery. The note was signed with a set of initials, the letters of a name belonging to a young man of the House of Black, a boy named Regulus, who had once served the dark and had turned against it in the end. He had given his life in that black lake, we later learn, so that the true locket might be stolen and, in time, destroyed. The old headmaster had spent the last of his strength for an empty shell. So the cave by the sea kept one last secret, even from those clever enough to reach its heart, that its greatest treasure had already slipped away in the hands of a repentant boy whose courage the world would not learn of for years. The fragment inside the true locket was still out there, waiting, and the trail of the hidden pieces was only beginning to unwind. But not every fragment would prove so patient or so well concealed, for one of them had already been found and pierced and undone in the deep beneath a school by a boy with a broken fang and a great deal of luck. Up next, in Chapter 13, The Diary Destroyed, we'll uncover how the very first of the soul pieces was unmasked in the Chamber of Secrets, and how its ruin taught the world, at last, how such dark anchors could be broken. We drift away now from the cave beside the sea, from that dark hollow where the water lapped at the stone and the silence pressed close, from the memory of a hidden thing sunk deep in a black lake underground. Let the cold of that place fall away behind us like a tide going out. We travel back in time, softly, to a year long before the cave was ever found, to a moment when no one yet understood what they had witnessed, to the very first of these dark objects to be undone. In this chapter, we settle into the story of the Diary Destroyed, the earliest unmaking of a Horcrux, though no one in that hour knew to call it by such a name. To understand it, we must let ourselves slip below the castle of Hogwarts, down through its floors and its stairways, into a chamber that most who lived there believed to be only a legend. For 1,000 years the school had stood upon its grounds, and for nearly all that time a rumor had passed quietly from student to student. A whisper of a hidden room built by one of the 4 founders. Salazar Slytherin so the old story went, had raised a secret chamber deep beneath the school before he left it, and inside he had sealed a creature meant to answer only to his true heir. The tale was passed down as tales are, half believed, half dismissed, and the years wore it smooth like a stone in a river. We watch from our peaceful distance as a young boy named Harry comes to the school in his second year. He is small still, quiet in his way, carrying more upon his shoulders than a child of 12 ought to carry. Around him that year, a strange fear begins to gather in the corridors. Students are found frozen, still as statues, their eyes open and unseeing, struck down by something none of the teachers can name. The old rumor stirs awake. The Chamber of Secrets, people begin to say, has been opened once again, and the creature within has been loosed upon the halls. What no one yet knows, what we alone may see from where we rest, is that behind all of it lies a single, small, and ordinary-looking object. It is a diary, a plain black book, the kind a child might carry to write down the small events of a day. Its pages are blank, its cover is worn. It had passed from hand to hand until it came, that year, into the possession of a young girl named Ginny Weasley, the youngest of a large and loving family, and the first to fall under its quiet influence. For this was no ordinary diary. It held within it a piece of a soul. 50 years before, when the dark wizard who would become Lord Voldemort was himself only a boy of 16 at that same school, he had poured a fragment of himself into the pages of the book. He was known then by another name, Tom Riddle, a clever and handsome student whom the teachers admired and the other children feared without quite knowing why. Into the diary he had placed a memory of himself, a version of the boy he had been, preserved and waiting, patient across the long decades for someone to open the cover and begin to write. We follow the slow spell of it. When Ginny wrote in the diary wrote back. The memory of the boy answered her in a friendly hand, gentle and understanding, and she came to trust it as one trusts a dear and secret friend. She told it her fears and her small sorrows, and all the while, page by page, the fragment of soul within the book drew strength from her, feeding on the warmth and life she gave it. As she grew paler and more tired, the memory grew clearer and more solid. It was, though no one living understood this yet, a Horcrux, one of several vessels into which the dark wizard had split his soul, so that even if his body were destroyed, some part of him might remain and never truly die. And so the creature of the old legend was real, after all. Deep beneath the castle, in the flooded and forgotten chamber, a great serpent had waded through the years. A basilisk born of dark and ancient magic, its gaze alone enough to kill. Through the girl, the memory of Riddle commanded it to move through the pipes of the school and strike at those he wished to harm. This was the shadow that had fallen over the corridors, and this was the fear that had gathered in the halls. We come now, calmly, to the heart of the tale. Ginny was drawn down at last into the chamber itself, carried there so that the last of her life might pour into the pages and make the boy of the diary whole again. On the cold floor of that hidden room she lay fading, her breath slow, her strength nearly gone, while the memory of Riddle stood over her, growing more real by the moment, watching her life leave her body to fill his own. It was there that Harry found her. He had made his way down into the chamber to save her. A boy of 12 alone in the dark, before the memory of a boy who would one day become the darkest wizard of the age. The basilisk came for him, and in the struggle that followed, a phoenix carried down a battered old hat, and from the hat Harry drew a gleaming silver sword. The serpent lunged, and though its long fangs sank deep into his arm, Harry drove the blade up through the roof of the creature's mouth, and the great basilisk fell. Now we reach the quiet center of everything, the small, still act upon which so much would turn. Harry pulled the venomed fang from his own arm. It was slick and long and heavy in his hand. The memory of Riddle stood before him, laughing without sound at what he believed was his victory, certain that the boy could not stop what was about to be born. And Harry, weakened and bleeding, took the fang and drove its point down into the pages of the plain black diary. We watch it happen slowly, without fear, the way one watches a candle gutter and go out. Ink welled up out of the wounded book like dark blood and spilled across the floor and across his hands. The memory of the boy who had called himself Tom Riddle threw back his head, and a great soundless cry went through him, and he began to come apart. The fragment of soul within the pages, torn and unmade, screamed silently into nothing and was gone. The book lay ruined and empty, its power spent, a scarred and hollow thing that could no longer harm anyone. And upon the floor, the color came back into Ginny's face. Her breath deepened. Her eyes opened. She was saved, drawn back from the edge she had been carried to, and the shadow lifted from the school. What none of them understood in that hour, not Harry, not the girl, not the teachers who welcomed them back into the light of the upper halls, was what had truly been destroyed. They believed it, a cursed object undone, a dark memory ended, a danger past. They did not know that they had struck the first blow against the immortality of Lord Voldemort himself. That plain black diary had been the first of his Horcruxes to be made, and now it was the first to be unmade, though the word would not be spoken aloud for years. It was the earliest sign, unrecognized and unread, of exactly what the dark wizard had done to his own soul, and of the strange and terrible labor that would one day be needed to end him for good. The fang, the ink, the ruined pages, all of it would return to memory later, when wiser eyes came at last to understand. For a boy had done, by instinct and by need, what grown wizards would afterwards spend years learning how to do on purpose. Up next in Chapter 14, The Ring and the Cursed Hand, we'll uncover how a second Horcrux was found in a broken house among the hills, and how the hand that destroyed it paid a slow and shadowed price for the touching of it. The diary lies silent now, its pages pierced through, its ink drained away into nothing. We remember how a single fang from a great serpent brought an end to that first hidden fragment of a broken soul, and how the boy who held it understood, in that quiet moment, that the thing he faced was not one enemy, but many, scattered and buried and waiting. That understanding would pass, in time, to an older and wearier man, a man whose gentle eyes had watched over the same castle for longer than most could remember. And so we turn from the ruined book to another object entirely, small and heavy and cold, a thing of gold and cracked black stone that had waited in the dark for a very long time. This is the story of the ring and the cursed hand, and it begins far from any school, in a place where the grass grows tall over a forgotten house. We follow an old wizard as he walks through a wood in the fading light of an ordinary afternoon. Albus Dumbledore is not a young man, and the years sit upon him softly, in the silver of his long beard and the slow, deliberate way he moves. He has spent many patient months learning the shape of a life long ended, the life of a boy who grew into the darkest wizard of the age. He has traced that boy back through memory and rumor to a single bloodline, a family that once called themselves the last true heirs of Salazar Slytherin. Their name was Gaunt, and their pride had outlasted their fortune by many bitter generations. By the time we arrive with Dumbledore at the place they once lived, Nothing remains but a low ruin half swallowed by nettles and ivy. A shack that leans as though it means one day soon to lie down and rest at last. Somewhere beneath the rotted boards and the fallen stones, Dumbledore knows, a small treasure has been hidden. It is a ring, plain to the untrained eye, its gold worn thin, its dark stone chipped along one face. To the family who kept it, it was a badge of ancient blood, a proof of descent they clung to even as everything else slipped away. But Dumbledore has come to suspect that it is far more than an heirloom. He believes it is one of those hidden things, one of the fragments the young man had made to anchor himself against death. And he believes, too, that it has been guarded, not by locks or by hands, but by a curse laid deep into its metal with terrible and loving care. We watch him search the ruin with the caution of a man who has spent a lifetime among dangerous things. He does not simply reach out and take what he came for. He circles it, tests the air around it, feels for the old enchantments layered one upon another like sediment at the bottom of a still pond. There are protections here, meant to kill, snares woven to punish any thief who dared to lift the ring from its resting place. With enormous skill and endless patience, Dumbledore unpicks them one by one, unbinding the outer defenses, drawing the sting from spell after spell, until the ring lies before him, seemingly quiet, seemingly safe. And here, in this hushed and careful moment, we come to the heart of the matter, to the thing that no amount of skill could have wholly foreseen. For the ring held a secret older even than the fragment sealed inside it. Set into that cracked black stone was one of the 3 fabled hollows, the Resurrection Stone, a relic out of the oldest and saddest of stories. It was said to call back the shadows of those who had died, to draw them near, faint and sorrowing, across the great distance between the living and the lost. Dumbledore had known grief in his long life. He had lost people he loved through his own pride and his own mistakes, and he had carried the weight of them for decade upon decade, quietly, where no one could see. And now, cradled in the ruin of that forgotten house, he held in his hand a stone that whispered of return, of one more meeting, one more chance to say the things left unsaid. We understand, watching him, how a wise man may still be undone by a tender wish. He knew the ring was cursed. He knew that to wear it was to invite something dark and swift into his own body. And yet the longing rose in him, old and deep, and for the space of a single breath, the scholar gave way to the mourner. He slipped the ring onto his finger, drawn by the promise of the stone, reaching across the years toward faces he had not seen in a lifetime. It was, he would later admit only to himself, a foolish act, the act of a man who wanted, just once, to stop being wise. The curse woke at his touch. It moved through him like a slow black tide, entering at the hand and spreading inward, patient and certain and cruel. His fingers darkened first, the skin turning the color of ash and old char, the life within them withering as though touched by a killing frost. There was no undoing it, no counterspell equal to a curse so ancient and so purely made. It meant to reach his heart, and it would, and when it did it, would end him. Dumbledore, who had faced many deaths and feared few, looked down at his ruined hand and understood, with a strange, low calm, that his own end had at last found its shape and its hour. We follow him then, as he carries the news, and the ring, and the withering curse, back to the one man who might slow what could not be stopped. Severus Snape was a master of the subtle arts of potion and defense, a man of hidden loyalties and deep buried sorrows of his own. With grim skill, he bent the curse away from its swift course, binding it, corralling it into the single blackened hand, buying time where time seemed already spent. It was not a cure. Both men knew that. It was a fragile wall raised against a rising sea, and behind it, Dumbledore was granted one more year, a single turning of the seasons in which to finish the work he had begun. One more year to teach, to plan, to prepare a boy for the burden that would fall to him. 1 year, no more, purchased at the cost of a slow and certain fading. And there is one more part of this quiet story, for the ring itself did not survive that year. Before the curse had run its course, Dumbledore drew from the darkened stone the fragment sealed within, and he destroyed the object that had held it. He did this with an ancient blade, the sword of Godric Gryffindor, a weapon forged with silver and set with rubies, a thing that took into itself only that which made it stronger. It had drunk once already of a great serpent's venom, and that venom had made it a bane to the hidden fragments, one of the few instruments in all the world that could unmake them. With that sword the ring was broken, its dark tenant driven out and destroyed, the last echo of the family's pride finally stilled. 2 fragments, then, were gone, the diary and the ring, and the darkened hand upon the old wizard's arm was the quiet price of the second. We leave him here, in the low light of his study, an old man with a ruined hand and a counted number of days, gazing at a small gold ring now emptied of its terror. He is not afraid. He has made his peace with the shape of his ending, and he turns his mind now to what remains, to the fragments still scattered and still whole, hidden in far places, waiting as they have always waited. And one among them has traveled farther and stranger than any other, passed from hand to hand across long years, lost and found and lost again. Up next in Chapter 15, The Locket's Long Journey, we'll uncover how a small golden locket, taken once from a dying woman and hidden in a cave beside the cold sea, slipped through the fingers of those who sought it, and how its wandering path led at last to the most unlikely of keepers. The ring is gone now, its cracked stone dark and silent, its curse spent at last upon the old blade that broke it. We can let that image settle and soften in our minds, the ruined signet lying still upon a worn desk while the fire burns low, and we can breathe out slowly, knowing that one small piece of a scattered soul has finally been unmade. 2 of the hidden vessels have fallen. The diary bled its ink into the stone floor of a forgotten chamber, and the ring surrendered its dark tenant in a quiet office high above a sleeping castle. Yet there remain others, waiting in the shadows of the world, and among them one that has traveled further and stranger than any of the rest. Tonight we follow that traveler. Tonight we trace the locket's long journey, the winding, patient path of a golden thing passed from hand to hand across many years, and we let its story carry us gently down into rest. To begin, we must go back to a cold sea and a hollow cave, a place of black water and pale light where a heavy chalice held a potion of despair. There, long ago, a proud young man came in secret, and with him came a small and loyal creature, a house elf named Creature, whose devotion to the ancient family of Black ran deeper than any spell. The young man was Regulus, a son of that old house, once dazzled by the promises of a rising darkness, and later quietly horrified by what those promises truly cost. He had learned, in the way of one who listens closely, that his master had hidden a fragment of himself inside a locket, and that the locket lay guarded within that dreadful cave. Regulus resolved to take it. He resolved to end it, though ending it would end him too. We watch him descend into that hollow place with Creature at his side. The elf, who had been there before as an unwilling instrument, drank the bitter potion so that his master might reach the true locket at the bottom of the stone basin, and in its place they set another, a false locket carrying a small hidden message of defiance folded within. The cave took its toll. The dark waters rose and clutched, and Regulus was lost to them, giving himself so that the true locket might be carried out into the air. But Creature, ordered to survive, obeyed. The magic that bound the elf to his master's command was older and stronger than the drowning spell of a cruel wizard, and so the little creature slipped free of that terrible shore, clutching the golden weight against his chest, and vanished away with a soft crack of ancient elf magic. He carried it home. He carried it to a tall, narrow house in London, a shuttered and secretive place, the family seat at number 12, Grimmauld Place. There, grieving and bewildered, Creature tried again and again to do what his lost master had asked of him, to destroy the locket, and again he failed. For no hammer he could lift, and no charm he knew could so much as scratch that stubborn shell. So the locket stayed. It stayed in that gloomy house through long, dim years, resting in cabinets and drawers, a small malignant heart beating quietly in the dark, while dust gathered on the mantels and the portraits dozed upon the walls. We can picture it there, hidden in plain sight among 100 forgotten trinkets, and we can feel how patient a hidden thing can be, how willing to wait. Years turned. The old house passed into the keeping of others, and a great cleaning came upon it, when heaps of cursed and cluttered objects were sorted and cast out. Amid that clearing, the golden locket was very nearly thrown away, handled, and set aside, its importance unguessed by the weary hands that touched it. And into this moment slipped a small, sly figure, a dealer in odd and questionable goods named Mundungus Fletcher, a man with quick fingers and a quicker eye for anything that glinted. He gathered up whatever trinkets he thought might fetch a coin, and among them, tucked away with the rest, went the locket. So it left the shuttered house at last, riding in the pocket of a wanderer who had no notion at all of what he carried, no sense of the sliver of ruined soul that lay curled inside its heavy gold. We follow it out into the wider city now, into markets and back rooms where such things are bought and bartered. And here the journey takes a strange and almost bitter turn. For the locket did not stay long with the little thief who had taken it. Pressed and frightened by an official of the wizarding government, a woman of cruel and syrupy manner named Dolores Umbridge, Mundungus surrendered it to her, or rather, she took it as the price of leaving him be. And so the locket came at last to rest against the throat of that stern and unkind woman, worn openly as an ornament, its false silver S mistaken for a mark of noble blood. We watch her sitting in the cold halls of the Ministry of Magic, the ancient relic gleaming at her collar, and we understand the deep and quiet irony of it, that so dark a treasure should ride so plainly upon so proud a chest, while all around her the corridors filled with fear. It was there, in that place of marble and menace, that the locket was found again by the ones who had been searching for it. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, moving in disguise through the very heart of the enemy's stronghold, saw the golden thing gleaming where they least expected it, and with daring and quick wit they took it back into their keeping. We need not dwell on the danger of that hour. Let us instead hold the simple fact of it, that after so many years and so many hands, after a drowned man and a faithful elf and a sly thief and a cruel official, the locket came round again to those who meant to end it. But taking it was not the same as unmaking it. And here, the long journey became a heavier thing to bear, for they could find no way to destroy it. And so they carried it with them through the wild months of their wandering. They kept moving from wood to hillside to lonely moor, pitching a small tent beneath gray skies, and the locket went with them. And because it was a piece of a living darkness, They wore it in turns against their skin so that it would not be lost or left behind. We can feel its corrupting weight now, that cold coil of gold lying upon the breastbone of whoever bore it, whispering its low and wordless discouragement, drawing out the doubts and sorrows already curled within a tired heart. It made the wearer heavy and gloomy and quick to bitterness. It preyed upon whatever fear was nearest, and it lay heaviest, perhaps, upon the one whose fears ran to loneliness and being unloved, tightening around his neck like a small ache that would not ease. So they carried it, and it wore upon them, and the journey stretched long across an autumn of cold rain and thin light. Yet even a burden borne in weariness is a burden nearly at its end, for a thing so patiently hunted cannot flee forever. The locket had crossed water and time, had passed through greed and grief and cruelty, and now it rested against the hearts of those who would at last find the means to open it. Somewhere ahead, in the frozen hush of a snow-bound forest, a light waited beneath dark water, and with it a blade of silver and rubies that had already tasted the venom that could undo such things. We can sense that meeting drawing near, quiet and certain, as sleep itself draws near. Up next in Chapter 16, The Sword and the Locket, we'll uncover how a silver-white light led 3 weary travelers to a frozen pool in the deep of a winter wood, how a lost blade rose gleaming from beneath the ice, and how the golden locket that had wandered so far was finally laid open and stilled forever. To understand the calm that settles over this chapter, we return for a slow moment to the long journey of the locket, that small, heavy oval of gold that had passed through so many hands and so many years. We remember how it began as an heirloom of Salazar Slytherin, carried down through the dwindling line of the Gaunts in their crooked little cottage. We remember how it was sold in sorrow, how it drifted into the collection of a wealthy woman, and how a young Tom Riddle folded a piece of his fractured soul inside it before hiding it in a cave beside a cold sea. We remember its rescue from that cave, and its quiet theft by a man who signed himself only with 3 initials, and then the strange path that brought it at last into the hands of a corrupt official before it slipped once more into the possession of 3 young travelers. All of that wandering, all of those miles and decades, had carried the locket toward this one still night in a snow-covered forest. And the story of that night is the story we call The Sword and the Locket. By the time we joined them, the 3 friends had been living for many weeks inside a small, enchanted tent, moving from one lonely landscape to another, never staying long, never lighting a fire brighter than they needed. They took turns wearing the locket, for they had learned that it did not like to be left alone, and they had learned, too, that it did not like to be worn. Against the skin it grew heavy and chill, and it seemed to whisper into the thoughts of whoever carried it, drawing out every private fear and every buried resentment, and turning them slowly over like stones. It was a patient thing, the locket, and it worked on the mind the way frost works on glass, quietly, without hurry, spreading its pattern until the whole surface was changed. The weight of it had told most heavily on the red-haired friend. In a low hour, worn thin by hunger and cold and the ceaseless murmur of the locket, he had turned away from the other 2 and walked out into the dark, and for a long time afterward the tent felt emptier than the whole white wilderness around it. Yet the story we are following is not a story of that leaving. It is a story of return and of the slow mending of a bond that had only seemed to break, and so we let the sorrow of his absence rest lightly, the way a sleeper lets a passing thought drift by, and we moved toward the night when the snow lay deep and something silver came walking through the trees. The 2 who remained had traveled north into a forest of tall, dark pines, where the ground was frozen hard and a small pool lay locked beneath a lid of ice. On this night, The young man kept watch alone while his friend slept, and as he stood among the shadows, he saw a light approaching, faint at first and then clearer. A soft glow that moved between the trunks without sound. It was a Patronus, that shimmering guardian shape which each witch or wizard forms from their happiest memory, and this one had taken the form of a doe. She was made of pure white radiance, slender and serene, and she came toward him with the quiet certainty of something that has been sent. She did not flee when he stepped forward. She only turned and looked back at him with her calm, luminous eyes and led him deeper into the wood. We follow the doe as she drifts over the snow, and we watch the young man follow her, drawn on by a trust he could not explain. She brought him to the frozen pool, and there, at its center, her light dissolved into the cold air and was gone, leaving him alone beneath the black branches and the scattered stars. Yet she had not led him to nothing. Beneath the ice, deep down in the still dark water, lay a long shape that caught what little light there was and threw it back in a thin silver line. It was a sword, a beautiful old blade set with red stones in its hilt, and even through the frozen surface he knew it at once. It was the sword of Godric Gryffindor, forged long ago by the goblins out of pure silver, and made stronger than any ordinary metal, a blade that took into itself only that which made it stronger. He understood, dimly, that this sword was the one thing that might destroy the locket, for it had been steeped in a venom that could unmake such dark objects, and so he broke the ice with careful blows and lowered himself into the freezing water to reach the blade. The cold closed over him like a fist. In that black water, the locket about his neck, which he had forgotten in his eagerness, drew suddenly tight, its chain shortening as though a hand had seized it, pulling him down and holding him under, while his breath ran out and the pale light of the surface trembled far above. This was the locket defending itself, using the very cold and the very depth to keep its destroyer from the sword. And here is where the return we spoke of becomes the heart of the night. Out of the darkness of the trees came the red-haired friend, back from his long absence, drawn to this place by a light of his own and by the pull of something he could not name. He saw the shape struggling beneath the ice, and without a thought for himself, he plunged his arm into the water and hauled his friend up into the air, and then reached down again and drew the heavy silver sword out of the pool. The two of them lay on the snow, soaked and shivering and alive, and for a while neither could do more than breathe. The friend had come back. The circle that had seemed broken had quietly closed again, and the sword of Gryffindor lay between them on the white ground, waiting. They knew what had to be done with it. They carried the locket to a flat stone in a small clearing, and they set it down, and they saw that it would not open easily to their hands. It answered instead to the old serpent tongue of its maker, and when at last it was made to open, the two golden halves parted to reveal not a jewel, but a pair of dark living eyes. And from those eyes, the last defense of the locket rose up into the cold air. It poured out shadow and smoke, and it shaped that smoke into visions meant to wound the one who held the sword. It called up figures out of his deepest doubts, cruel, shimmering images that told him he was the least loved and the least needed, that he had always been passed over, that his friends valued each other and never him. It spoke to every fear he had ever carried in silence, and it made those fears tall and bright and terrible, hoping to freeze his heart the way the pool had frozen the water. For a moment, the visions held him, and his hand shook, and the sword hung heavy at his side. But the friend he had rescued called to him steadily out of the dark, telling him that the shapes were lies, that the thing in the smoke knew only how to twist and never how to speak the truth. And so, gathering himself against all that shining sorrow, The red-haired young man lifted the goblin-made sword high and brought it down upon the open locket. The blade fell true. There was a sound like a long breath released, a flash, and then the shadows collapsed inward and were gone, and the visions folded away into nothing, and the small, heavy oval of gold lay split and silent upon the stone, its darkness spent at last. The soul fragment within it had been unmade, gently and completely, and could trouble no one ever again. They stood together over the broken locket in the hush that follows a storm, and the forest around them seemed to soften, the frost easing on the branches, the pool settling back into its own quiet. One Horcrux more had been undone, and a friendship had been mended in the very act of undoing it, and the sword of Gryffindor gleamed clean in the starlight as though nothing had ever stained it. Yet even as one of these hidden vessels fell silent, others waited still in the wide world, and one of them lay far underground, guarded by ancient enchantments in a vault deep below a marble bank. Up next, in Chapter 17, The Cup from the Deepest Vault, we'll uncover how a small golden goblet of Helga Hufflepuff came to rest behind locked doors of stone and gold, and what perils and wonders lay in wait for those who would seek it there. There is a certain comfort in remembering that even the heaviest journeys are taken one quiet step at a time. In the chapters before this one, we followed the story of the sword and the locket, of a blade forged with old goblin skill, and a small golden shell that carried a splinter of a broken soul. We watched the sword answer to courage, drawn out of still water by a hand that needed it, and we watched the locket at last fall open and lose its hold on the world. Those two objects belong together in memory now, one that healed and one that had to be undone. And as the locket cooled and went silent, another shape rose slowly into view, older and stranger, hidden far below the ground where sunlight has never reached. This is the tale of the cup from the deepest vault. To understand it, we drift down beneath the busy streets of the wizarding world into the ancient bank run by the goblins, a place of marble halls and long counters and doors that trust no one. Below those upper floors, past the ordinary strongboxes, there is a second world entirely. A network of tunnels and cold stone chambers carved so deep that the air itself feels heavy and old. There, in a vault that had belonged for many generations to a proud and secretive family, rested a small golden cup, its two fine handles curved like the wings of a resting bird, its surface marked with the crest of a badger. It was a relic of Helga Hufflepuff herself, one of the four who built the great school long ago. And it had been quietly claimed and corrupted, made into a hiding place for a shard of a soul that did not wish to die. 3 travelers had set their minds on reaching it. They knew the danger, and they carried it lightly, the way people do when there is simply no other road forward. Their plan turned on disguise, on becoming for a short while people they were not. Through old and careful magic, one of them took on the face and bearing of a stern woman of that ancient family, a bank customer no goblin would dare to question too closely. The others walked as her companions, one hidden almost entirely from sight, the other shaped into a hunched and nervous stranger. We follow them as they pass through the tall bronze doors, hearts steady in the way that fear can become when it has nowhere left to go, and we watch them move deeper, deeper into the care of a suspicious goblin who agrees at last to lead them below. The way down was a long ride on a small cart that ran on rails through the dark, plunging and turning through the rock. The tunnels grew colder as they descended, and the walls opened now and then onto vast drops where the light of a single lantern could not find the bottom. At one point the cart rushed through a curtain of water that seemed to strip away all pretense, a waterfall placed there by the goblins for exactly that purpose. and the borrowed faces began to fail. Yet still they pressed on, because turning back was its own kind of ending, and they had chosen the other one. And then, near the oldest vaults, they came upon the guardian of the deep. We arrive now at the strangest and saddest sentinel in this whole story, a dragon kept far underground to protect the wealth of the most important families. It was a pale and ragged creature, its scales gone almost colorless from years without sun, its eyes clouded, its great body scarred by a cruel and simple trick. The goblins had trained it to fear a certain sound, a rattle of metal, so that even the promise of pain was enough to make it shrink away. There is a tenderness in how our travelers looked upon it, this vast and powerful animal, taught to be afraid of a small noise, chained in the dark and forgotten. They used the rattle to pass, and they felt the wrongness of it even as they did, and we hold that feeling with them for a moment before moving on. Inside the family vault, the true test waited, and it was a test made of pure enchantment. Long ago, the goblins and the old families had woven two fierce protections over the treasure hidden there. The first was a multiplying charm, so that any object touched would suddenly split and copy itself again and again, filling the space with false duplicates until a thief might drown in worthless gold. The second was a burning charm, so that everything touched would grow scalding hot, searing the hands that reached for it. Together they turned the vault into a rising tide of fiery, fake riches, cups and coins and goblets tumbling and swelling and glowing with heat. Each new one born the instant a finger brushed the last. We watch our travelers wade into this flood, arms scorched, boots slipping on a floor that keeps climbing toward the ceiling, searching for one true cup among 1,000 shining lies. High on a shelf, out of easy reach, the real cup at last caught the lantern light. The badger crest, the twin handles, the faint old shimmer of a founder's craft. All of it unmistakable to eyes that had learned to feel the presence of these hidden soul fragments. Getting it down was no small thing. It meant balancing above the swelling mound. It meant one desperate stretch with a borrowed blade to hook a handle. It meant catching the small, heavy weight of it as the whole vault seemed to boil upward around them. But the cup came free. It passed into the hands that had come so far to claim it, and for one bright, burning instant, the deepest vault had given up its secret. Escape was the next impossible thing, and here the pale dragon returns to the tale as an unlikely savior. Cut loose from its chains in the chaos, the great creature could feel that the way to the surface lay upward and open. Our travelers climbed onto its broad, scarred back, holding to the ridges of its spine, and the dragon, sensing freedom for the first time in longer than it could remember, began to force its way up through the tunnels toward the distant light. It tore through the bank's defenses, burst through the ceilings of the marble halls, and rose at last into open sky, blinking in a brightness it had almost forgotten. We drift with them over the rooftops of the wizarding world, 3 weary riders and 1 freed dragon, the golden cup safe among them, the wind cool and clean after the heat of the vault. When the moment came, they slipped from the dragon's back into a wide gray lake, and they let the creature fly on alone into a sky that was finally wholly its own. The cup itself would wait a while longer for its ending, and when that ending came, it was quiet and swift. Far away, on the last night of the long struggle, when the great school stood surrounded and afraid, one of the 3 carried the cup down into the ancient underground chamber where a monstrous serpent had once been kept, the hidden place beneath the castle that few had ever seen. There, among the pale bones and the still water, lay the long curved fangs of that dead beast, teeth full of a venom so fierce that few things in the world could withstand it. She took up one of those fangs, and she brought it down upon the golden cup, and the shard of soul inside gave a thin cry and let go, undone by the same rare poison that had once made the serpent so feared. So, the second of the hidden vessels was broken, deep beneath the very school where the whole story began. For now, though, we leave the golden cup shining and safe in tired hands. Its long sleep in the deepest vault ended at last. Up next in Chapter 18, Fire in the Room of Hidden Things, we'll uncover how another lost fragment waited high in a forgotten attic of the castle, buried in a mountain of abandoned things, and how a searching flame would rise there that could destroy almost anything it touched. We leave behind the deepest vault, where the golden cup of Helga Hufflepuff had waited in the dark beneath a mountain of multiplying treasure, and we let that cold, echoing chamber fade from our thoughts. The cup is accounted for now, one more piece of a broken soul brought at last into the light. And as we breathe out slowly, following the long thread of this story, we rise up out of the earth and travel far to the north, to a castle set upon a hill above a black lake, where the last of these hidden things is waiting to be found. Tonight, in a chapter we might call Fire in the Room of Hidden Things, we settle into the great walls of Hogwarts on the 2nd of May, in the year 1998, and we watch how a lost crown finally meets its end. The castle that night was not the quiet, sleeping place it had been for so many centuries. Yet even in the midst of everything, there were pockets of stillness, small folds of calm tucked away between the noise, and it is into one of these that we now drift. High on the 7th floor, along a stretch of corridor that thousands of students had passed 1,000 times without a second glance, there stood a stretch of blank stone wall across from a faded tapestry. Most who walked there saw nothing. But for those who knew how to ask, who paced 3 times before the wall with a single clear need held in their minds, a door would grow out of the smooth stone, quiet as a held breath, and open onto a room that was never the same room twice. This was the Room of Requirement, and on this particular night, it had taken one of its most secret shapes. We follow a young wizard named Harry as he steps inside, and we watch the door melt shut behind him, and at once we understand why the room felt so heavy with old silence. It had become the Room of Hidden Things, a vast and towering space piled high with the forgotten leavings of centuries. Everything that anyone had ever wished to conceal within these walls had found its way here. We move among aisles taller than houses, past broken furniture and dusty tomes, past tarnished instruments and stoppered bottles, past cages and crates and the crooked spines of 10,000 abandoned books. It was a museum of things that were never meant to be seen again. Generations of students had come here to bury their secrets. A stolen object slipped between 2 chairs, a forbidden potion tucked behind a wardrobe, a love letter never sent and never destroyed. The dust lay soft and thick over all of it, and the light that filtered down from somewhere high above was the color of old parchment. To walk here was to walk through the quiet weight of everyone who had ever lived and dreamed and hidden something away inside this castle. And somewhere in this endless tide of the forgotten, small and patient, waited a crown. We know it as the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the 4 who had raised these walls 1,000 years before. She had been the wisest of the founders, and her diadem was said to sharpen the mind of whoever wore it, a slender band of silver set with a single blue stone. It had vanished from the world long ago, carried off by her own grieving daughter, and for centuries it had been counted as lost forever. But it was not lost. It had come home to Hogwarts in the hands of a clever, hollow young man who had once been a student here, and he had done to it the same terrible thing he had done to the cup and the locket and the rest. He had hidden a piece of himself inside it, and then he had tucked it away among the hidden things, believing that no living soul would ever think to look. We watch Harry move slowly through the aisles, turning his head, listening to some quiet certainty inside himself. There is no panic in the way he searches. He has learned, over long months, to trust the strange pull that draws him toward these buried fragments. And at last, atop a battered old cupboard, half buried beneath a chipped bust wearing a dusty wig, the blue stone catches what little light there is. He reaches up, and the diadem is in his hands, cool and heavy and real. The last hidden thing comes suddenly out of hiding, after all those silent years. But we are not alone in this room of forgotten things. 3 other young men had followed Harry inside, students who had chosen the wrong side in the quarrel that was tearing the castle apart. They meant to trap him among the towering shelves. One of them, a boy named Crabbe, reached for a spell far older and far crueler than anything he understood. We watched the words leave his mouth, and we watched the fire come. It was not ordinary fire. It was fiend fire, cursed flame, a living thing of appetite and hunger, and it poured out of nothing and swelled into shapes that seemed almost alive. Serpents of flame rose up the aisles. Great burning beasts, chimeras and fiery birds and things with no name, coiled and reared among the mountains of the hidden. The fire did not merely burn the forgotten treasures of 1,000 years. It devoured them, swallowing furniture and books and crates whole, growing higher and hotter with everything it consumed, until the whole vast room was a roaring sea of gold and orange light. Even here, in the heart of the burning, we hold our calm. We watch the flames climb the towers of forgotten things and turn 1,000 years of secrets into rising smoke. And we understand that fire, in its way, is only another kind of forgetting, faster than dust, but no less complete. The young man who had summoned it could not command it, for such fire answers to no one, and soon the 3 who had lit it were themselves lost in the smoke and the heat. Harry did not leave them. Even as the flames rose around him, he and his 2 friends found brooms among the wreckage, old and half forgotten like everything else in that room, and they rose up above the fire on them. We lift with them, up into the cooler air near the high ceiling, above the reach of the burning beasts, and we watch them turn back into the smoke to search for the ones who had wished them harm. It is a strange and tender thing to risk the fire for those who lit it, but that is what happened in the smoke that night. 2 of the 3 were pulled up onto the brooms and carried toward the door, and only Crabbe, who had called the flames, could not be reached in time. And the diadem. In the confusion of the smoke and the climbing fire, the crown slipped from where it had been held, and it fell down into the roaring heart of the fiend fire. We watch it drop, a small bright thing turning end over end, down into flame so hot and so hungry that it could destroy the very things ordinary magic could not touch. Cursed fire is one of the few forces in all the world able to unmake such an object, to burn away the fragment of soul bound inside it, and so, as the diadem struck the flames, something screamed. It was not a human voice. It was the sound of a hidden piece of a broken man being burned out of the world, a thin, dark cry rising with the smoke. And then it was gone. They flew out through the door, the 3 of them, low and fast, tumbling into the cool corridor beyond as the fire raged behind the closing wall. And when the smoke cleared from Harry's eyes, he found the diadem lying near the doorway, fallen out with them at the last, cracked and blackened. A thread of dark smoke curling from the ruined silver. The crown itself was only a broken thing now, but the piece of soul it had carried for so long had been consumed in the flames it could not survive. Another fragment was gone, quietly, into the vast forgetting of the fire. We rest a moment here, in the hush after the burning, and we let the castle settle around us again. One more piece has fallen. The cup, the locket, the diary, the ring, the diadem, all of them accounted for now. But a soul split so many times still has one part left that walks and breathes, and one more that few would ever have guessed. Up next, in Chapter 19, The Serpent's End, we'll uncover how the great snake that guarded him met her fate in the last hour of that long night, and how the final threads of this 1,000-year story were gently drawn together at the close. The fire we left behind in the Room of Hidden Things had already begun to fold in on itself, its cursed light softening into a distant orange glow that no longer reached the corridors below. That blaze had swallowed a diadem older than memory, and with it a fragment of a soul that had waited there for half a century. Now, we drift away from that heat, down through the shifting stairways of the castle, past tapestries that ripple in the warm draft, toward the cold night air of the grounds, where the last chapter of this long unmaking waits to be told. This is the tale we might call The Serpent's End, and it moves slowly, the way all endings move when we are close enough to watch them breathe. By this hour, the Battle of Hogwarts had spread across the 2nd of May in 1998 like a tide that would not be stilled. Yet for all the noise and all the moving figures, one small piece of the puzzle remained untouched, curled and patient, far from the falling stone. That piece was Nagini, the great serpent, the last of the object Horcruxes still whole in the world. She was not carved of gold like the cup, nor cool and heavy like the locket, nor delicate like the diadem that had just turned to ash. She was living, breathing, watchful, and that made her the strangest vessel of them all. Into her Tom Riddle had poured a sliver of himself, and over the years that sliver had grown so close to her that the line between the snake and the fragment had nearly disappeared. We should pause here, in the hush before the ending, to understand how carefully she had been kept. Voldemort had come to fear the loss of his hidden pieces. Somewhere in the long night he had sensed his soul thinning, felt the destruction of things he had trusted to remain secret, and so he drew his last and most precious guardian close. He wrapped Nagini not in shadow alone, but in a shell of enchantment, a shimmering sphere of protective magic that hung in the air around her, like glass spun from starlight. Within that enchanted cage she coiled and turned, safe from blade and spell, floating just behind her master wherever he chose to stand. No ordinary weapon could reach her. No wand raised in haste could pierce that curved and gleaming barrier. He had made of her a treasure sealed inside a bubble, and he believed that seal would hold. For a time, it did hold. The serpent rode within her sphere through the smoke, a slow green shape behind a wall of light, and those who glimpsed her must have felt how untouchable she seemed. This was the point of the enchantment, after all. It was meant to say, without words, that this last fragment could not be undone, that the dark work of so many years had one final anchor that would never slip. And yet the whole story of the Horcruxes is the story of anchors slipping, one after another, each thought unbreakable until the moment it broke. Now we turn our attention to a young man who had spent most of his school years in the quiet middle of things, rarely at the center, rarely praised, often overlooked. Neville Longbottom had been the sort of boy who forgot his passwords and lost his belongings and blushed when spoken to, the sort no one would have marked as the one to end a legend. But the war had reached into him and drawn something out that even he had not known was there. Through that long night he had led, he had stood in doorways and refused to move. He had gathered the frightened and the weary and given them somewhere to look for courage. The soft boy from the greenhouses had become, without ever announcing it, a pillar the castle leaned upon. There came a moment in the courtyard, in a pause the battle sometimes grants, when Voldemort stood before the gathered defenders and offered them the picture of his triumph. He wished them to believe the fight was finished, and it was into this stillness, this held breath of a moment, that Neville stepped forward, alone, walking toward the most feared figure of the age, with nothing certain in his hands. He would not kneel to the story he was being told. He spoke instead of loyalty, of those who had fallen and would not be forgotten. And though we do not linger on his exact words, we feel the weight of them settling over the courtyard, like the first snow of a long winter. To silence him, and perhaps to make of him an example, Voldemort reached for an old cruelty. He set the sorting hat upon Neville's head and wrapped it in flame, meaning to bind the boy in fire before them all. For a breath it seemed the young man would simply burn there, held fast, a warning to any who still dreamed of resistance. But the sorting hat is not only cloth and memory. It has held a secret since the founders first enchanted it, a secret that reveals itself only to those who need it and are worthy of it. Out of the burning hat, in the middle of that ring of fire, came the sword of Godric Gryffindor. Its ruby-set hilt caught the low light, its silver blade rang free, and it fell into the hand of the one person in that courtyard who had earned, without ever seeking it, the right to hold it. This is the old promise of the sword, that it comes to a true Gryffindor in the hour of greatest need, and it had chosen a boy who once could barely be heard across a classroom. The flames fell away from him. He stood straight, blade in hand, and the whole meaning of the night seemed to gather itself into that single figure. Then the serpent came, whether she was loosed by her master's fury or moved by the fragment inside her that sensed a threat. Nagini struck out of the air toward the courtyard, and here the enchanted cage, the sphere of light that had made her untouchable, could not save what it was meant to guard. For in that instant she had left its shelter to strike. We watched the young man lift the ancient sword, the weapon of a founder, the one blade proven able to destroy these hidden pieces of a broken soul. We watch him bring it down in a single clean arc. The great serpent's head parted from her body, and the last object Horcrux was undone in the space of a heartbeat. There is a curious quiet that follows such a moment, and we should rest in it. No triumphant cry marked the deed. It was done the way the truest brave things are done, without flourish, almost without pause, as if the young man had simply understood what was needed and had refused to look away from it. In beheading Nagini, he had struck down the final external fragment of the darkest wizard of the age. The cup, the locket, the diadem, the ring, the diary, and now the serpent, all of them severed from the whole. The long chain of Horcruxes that had been forged in secret and scattered across years and miles had at last been broken, linked by patient link, down to this one green shape falling still upon the stones. We might imagine the shudder that must have passed through the enchanter who made her, the sudden knowledge that the last of his anchors had slipped. He had believed the serpent beyond reach, and a boy he would never have feared had proven him wrong with a single stroke. The story he told of his own immortality had held one final thread, and that thread was cut in the courtyard beneath the wounded towers of the school. And so the serpent's end came not from the mightiest wizard nor the oldest hero, but from the quiet one, the overlooked one, the boy who grew brave in the dark. With Nagini fallen, every piece that Voldemort had hidden away from himself in objects and in living things was gone from the world. Every piece but one, for there remained still a single fragment, carried unknowing through the years in the most unexpected of all vessels. And its story is the one that draws every other thread together. Up next in Chapter 20, The Last Fragment, we'll uncover how the final sliver of a broken soul had traveled hidden in plain sight, and how the whole long tale of these buried pieces at last comes home. The great serpent had come to her end in the courtyard, and with the falling of that last living vessel, the count of hidden soul pieces stood nearly complete. 6 of them had been unmade across the long years of searching, in cave and vault and forest and ruined shack, and now only 1 remained. That final splinter did not rest in silver or in gold, nor in any object that could be carried into fire. It waited instead inside a boy, hidden so deep that even he had not known it was there. We follow the story now to its quiet center, to the piece that had lived the longest in the open air, the piece that would ask more than any other before it could be let go. To understand the last fragment, we return to a night in a nursery many years earlier, when a curse meant to end a child had rebounded and torn the dark wizard nearly to nothing. In that instant, with his body undone and his soul already frayed by all the splitting he had done, a sliver broke loose. It found the nearest living thing and settled there, unbidden, unplanned. A 7th piece made by accident where all the others had been made by design. So the boy grew up carrying a stranger beneath his skin, a low hum of another mind, a scar that ached when the old darkness stirred. He did not choose it, and for a long time he did not understand it. He only knew that some part of what he faced was, in some hidden way, already part of him. By the time the final battle gathered around the old school, the truth had come clear to him. He had learned, through memories left behind and through the slow arithmetic of loss, that while this last fragment lived, he could not be free, and neither could the world. The dark wizard could not truly die while a shard of his soul walked and breathed inside another. The realization did not fill the boy with terror in the way we might expect. It arrived instead as a strange, level calm, the kind that comes at the very bottom of exhaustion, when there is nothing left to bargain with and the only path forward is the simplest one. He understood what was being asked, and he found, to his own quiet surprise, that he was ready to give it. And so we watch him walk. He leaves the lighted halls behind, passes the wounded and the weary without waking them to what he means to do, and steps out beyond the edges of the grounds toward the dark line of the trees. This is the last fragment made visible, not as a splinter of soul, but as a boy moving through the night to meet it. The forbidden forest opens ahead of him, older than the school, older than the founders. A hushed cathedral of trunks and moss where the moonlight falls in thin coins on the ground. He does not run. He does not turn back. He walks the way a person walks who has already made peace with the far side of the door. He carries with him a small comfort, a token that let him feel, for a few last steps, the nearness of those who had gone before him. They moved beside him through the trees like breath on a cold morning, faint and warm and utterly without fear. And they told him without words that dying was far easier and far gentler than he had ever believed. Their presence steadied him. It reminded him that he was not the first to walk toward an ending with love at his back, and that he would not be the last. We watch the shapes of them fade as he reaches the clearing, and we feel, even here, that nothing truly precious is ever wholly lost. In the clearing, the dark wizard waited among his followers, certain of his triumph, certain that the boy had come to be destroyed. And the boy did not raise a wand. He did not cast a single spell. He stood still and let the moment come, offering no defense, choosing surrender not out of despair, but out of a deeper knowing. When the green light broke from the other wand and crossed the small space between them, it struck the boy and it struck the fragment at the same instant. Here, is the tender heart of the whole long tale. The curse did not take the boy. It took the piece of the other soul that had ridden inside him for so many years. That splinter, torn off in a nursery and hidden ever since, was burned away in a single breath, unmade like the diadem in the fire and the locket under the blade. The last fragment was gone, and the boy, against every expectation, remained. He drifted for a while in a place that was quiet and bright and without pain. A threshold where a choice was offered to him, and he chose to come back. We watch him return to himself on the forest floor, breath moving again in his chest, the night still soft above the trees. He kept his stillness a little longer, letting them believe the work was finished, gathering the strength for what remained. For though the 7 pieces were now unmade, one task still waited. The maker of all those wounds still stood, whole in body if not in soul. And the two of them would have to face each other one final time. That last meeting took place not in shadow, but in the great hall, as the light of morning began to climb the windows. There was no grand exchange of spells, no long and desperate struggle. There was only a single casting from each of them, and a truth about wands and allegiance that the dark wizard did not understand, and the boy did. The killing curse leapt out once more, sure of itself, and it met the boy's simple disarming charm in the air between them. But the wand the dark wizard held had never truly belonged to him. Its loyalty lay elsewhere, with the boy who faced him, and so the deadly curse would not do its master's bidding. It turned in the air. It rebounded upon the one who sent it, and with no remaining fragment to catch him, no hidden anchor left in all the world, the dark wizard fell. He fell as any mortal falls, finally and completely, undone by the very magic he had trusted to make him deathless. Let us rest here a moment and consider the meaning of it. A soul, we are told, is meant to be whole, one indivisible thing that a person carries through a single life. To tear it once is a grave wound. To tear it 7 times is to trade nearly all of what makes a self warm and human for the cold promise of never ending. The dark wizard had done exactly that, scattering himself into cup and locket, diadem and ring, diary and serpent, and, by accident, a child. Each division had bought him a little more time and cost him a little more of what a soul is for. And in the end, when every vessel had been unmade, there was so little left of him that he could not survive even his own reflected curse. The lesson of the last fragment is not one of horror. It is a quiet reminder that wholeness cannot be counterfeited, that the parts of us we give away in fear are the very parts that let us live at all. And so the long hunt closed, not with thunder, but with the ordinary hush of a morning after a storm. The castle stood wounded and standing. The pieces were gathered and gone. The one who had feared death above all things had met it as a plain and equal end, no longer a lord of anything, only a man who had misunderstood what living was worth. Peace settled over the old stones the way light settles, slowly, without asking permission, filling the empty places left behind. There is still one thing left for us to do together before we let the night carry us fully under. Having followed every splinter from its making to its unmaking, we might pause and ask what it all was truly about, and what a soul kept whole can teach us as we drift towards sleep. And so we return one last time to the terrible spell where our story began, the tearing of a soul in the pursuit of endless life. We followed it from Herpo the Foul in the ancient world to a clever and hollow boy who asked a forbidden question in a quiet office. We watched a single soul split again and again into a diary and a ring, a locket and a cup, a diadem and a serpent, and at last, without his knowing, into a child. And then we watched them fall, one by one, in the dark. A basilisk fang beneath the castle, a silver sword, and a slow-dying hand, a doe of light on a frozen pool, fire in a room of forgotten things, a boy who walked willingly into a forest and gave up the last fragment of all, 7 pieces of a soul, gathered across a lifetime of fear, undone by courage, by loyalty, and by love. In the end, the darkest magic ever made could not outlast the simplest truth, that a life clung to at any cost is not a life at all. The fragments are gone. The soul is whole again and finished. From immortality to dust, the long shadow of the Horcruxes settles into stillness. Good night. What did you think of this journey through the darkest magic Voldemort ever created? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed the way you understand his story or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.